Hi guys! Tonight we ease ourselves into the thick grey breath of Victorian London, a place where the air itself feels heavy enough to sit on your shoulders. You step into the city as if waking inside a dream where visibility shrinks and distance bends. The first thing you notice is the fog. It settles around your ankles, climbs slowly toward your waist, then wraps itself around your throat in a slow, cool embrace. The people around you hardly seem to mind. They drift through it with practiced ease, their outlines swallowed and reshaped at every turn. You move forward, and the scent of coal damp brick and horse manure settles inside your lungs before you even realise you have inhaled. It is the sort of air that makes your eyes water quietly, the kind that encourages you to blink slowly so you can pretend that the sting is just the wind. A faint lamplight flickers nearby. It sways in the fog like a lonely candle searching for meaning. Victorian London is famous for its thick industrial smog, and one mainstream historical fact is that many visitors wrote about arriving by train, only to find the station platform so dim they could barely see the person waiting beside them. You feel something similar now. The glow from the lamp feels weak, as if reluctant to fight the haze that curls around it. You walk forward, guided more by the rhythm of footsteps around you than by any sense of sight. There is a certain softness to the fog that almost feels comforting. But then there is the reminder hidden underneath the quiet note that says, "You probably will not survive this for very long if you stay outside without warmth or shelter." The city breathes cold and soot in equal measure. It has teeth that bite without leaving marks. As you adjust to the half-light, you begin hearing sounds that feel slightly softened by the floating particles. A distant carriage wheel grinding against a stone, a vendor calling out from somewhere you cannot see, the metallic clank of a door shutting. Everything reaches you through a padded filter as if the world has wrapped itself in wool. Victorian fog was not ordinary weather. It was a thick blend of moisture and coal smoke. Some people even called it pea soup fog because of its deep yellow-green tint. One quirky tidbit from the era mentions that some Londoners swore they could taste metal on their lips during the worst of these episodes. You imagine licking the air almost by accident and feeling a faint tang, something like old iron or wet pennies. It is not pleasant, but it is distinct. It belongs to this city in the same way the stones beneath your feet do. You take another step and feel the wind shift slightly. The fog moves like a living creature, drifting in slow waves that reveal and then conceal the street ahead. Historians still argue whether the frequency of these fogs was exaggerated in popular memory, or if Victorian London truly lived beneath a near-constant curtain of haze. What you can feel, though, is the difference between simple mist and the heavy industrial weight of a world fueled by coal. Every chimney adds to the soup. Every hearth, every factory, every engine contributes its quiet offering to the grey sky. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop a comment with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights. You continue walking as the introduction blends into your exploration. Your boots brush against damp cobblestones. The stones feel slick beneath your feet, not muddy or unstable, but quietly treacherous. You imagine someone losing their balance here, and no one noticing immediately because the fog makes even dramatic movements appear slow and vague. A carriage passes nearby, and for a moment you only see the shape of the horse, appear and vanish legs, emerging from the mist like something from a half-forgotten memory. Your fingertips graze the side of a building as you pass. The bricks are cold, almost wet. They feel as if they have been sweating under the weight of trapped moisture. You pull your hand back and see nothing unusual, yet the sensation lingers. Everything in this city carries the same damp heaviness, a perpetual chill that creeps under collars and cuffs without asking permission. Even your breath feels thick as it escapes your body and blends with the surrounding haze. Some people imagined that fog made London mysterious and charming. Others knew it carried dangers that were more practical. Without clear visibility, carts collided. People fell into the river. Pickpockets moved with ease through the blurriness. Fires started when lamps were placed too close to flammable material. You picture yourself paused near a street corner, unsure which direction to turn, because both sides appear equally swallowed. You can barely see the faint shimmer of gas lamps stretching into the distance. The smell changes as you continue. There is the familiar coal smoke, then a sudden bitterness that might be tannery waste drifting from a nearby workshop. Somewhere beyond that, a bakery tries to push back the gloom, with warm loaves that smell faintly sweet. Everything mixes in the fog, like an uninvited stew. Some sense comfort, some do not. All of them cling to clothing and hair long after you have left the street. Ahead of you, a figure approaches. You see them only when they are a few steps away. Their shape forming slowly, like ink spreading through water. They nod politely, perhaps recognizing the shared discomfort of moving through a world that refuses to reveal itself fully. In this moment, you realize how disorienting it must have been to navigate these conditions every day. People learn to trust sound memory and instinct more than sight. Crossing a road required courage. Walking alone required confidence. Finding someone in the fog could take hours. Your steps guide you farther into the city, and you begin to understand why London gained a reputation for gloom. Not emotional gloom, although that certainly played its part, but literal gloom. Light feels swallowed before it can spread. You imagine the sun trying its best to cut through the smog, only to give up and let the haze create a world of perpetual twilight. Workers left home in near darkness and returned in near darkness. Time itself must have felt slippery. You pause for a moment listening. A distant bell chimes. The sound travels strangely, stretching and then shrinking depending on how the fog decides to carry it. You wonder if people misjudge distances because of this effect, hearing something close that was actually far, or something faint that was right beside them. The city becomes a trickster under these conditions. It offers clues but refuses to give answers. As you continue deeper, a soft ash begins to fall. Not quite snow, not quite soot, just small grey flecks drifting lazily downward. They settle on your coat without melting. They cling stubbornly, whispering reminders of factories that run without pause. You brush them off only to find more settling moments later. Your breath slows. Your steps become softer. The fog begins to feel less like a threat and more like a curtain, gently lowering over your awareness. You are still alert, still curious, but everything feels slightly muted, as if the city wants you to ease into its rhythm rather than resist it. Victorian London invites you to observe, to wander, to feel the weight of its realities without rushing. And this is only your arrival. You leave the main road behind, stepping carefully into a narrower lane where the fog thins just enough for shadows to reveal their shapes. Victorian London tries its best to present respectability along its broad boulevards, but the truth always waits behind the glittering surface. You move away from the polished storefronts and gaslit windows, slipping into the tight spaces that most visitors avoided. Here the city feels as though it is pulling you closer, guiding you past the illusion of order and into the cramped lungs of its real existence. Your boots tap gently on uneven stone. The walls sit close together, almost squeezing the air between them. Laundry lines hang above you, looping from one window to another, heavy with damp shirts and skirts that drip onto the ground with soft, cold taps. You tilt your head upward and see only a thin ribbon of sky stretched between towering buildings that seem determined to block the daylight. The smell shifts again. It is less of coal here and more of soaked wood, stale vegetables, and human closeness. You imagine hundreds of people living within the surrounding walls, separated only by thin planks that do very little to hide sound or scent. Behind the respectable streets lay some of the most densely packed urban environments in 19th century Europe. One mainstream historical fact is that many of these back alleys were never included in official maps because authorities considered them too chaotic and unplanned to categorize neatly. You walk through one now, knowing you are in a place that once existed almost like a rumor acknowledged quietly but rarely shown to outsiders. As you move deeper, you hear muffled conversations through cracked shutters. Voices overlap in a way that suggests routine, not urgency. Pots clatter somewhere above. A baby cries briefly, then falls silent. A door creaks open behind you, and a young boy runs past, carrying a basket overflowing with scraps of cloth. He does not look at you, too focused on his errand. The basket smells faintly of damp wool. When he disappears around the corner, the alley seems to fold itself back into its closed, private quiet. Historians still argue whether these back lanes fostered a greater sense of community or desperation. Some accounts describe neighbours supporting one another in an almost familial way, while others depict isolation so sharp that people could live within touching distance and barely know each other. As you walk, you sense how both could be true. The closeness feels comforting until you notice the dimness, the smells, the persistent sense that every sound is being catalogued by unseen ears. You turn left at a bend where the alley narrows so much your shoulders almost touch the walls. A cat appears from beneath a crate, its fur mottled with soot. It watches you with slow, deliberate blinks before weaving between your ankles. You reach down to scratch its head, and it nudges your hand lightly. Victorian alley cats often survived by hunting rats, and one quirky tidbit notes that some households kept unofficial feline guardians to control infestations because traps were expensive. The cat wanders off, tail flicking, disappearing into the next sliver of shadow. A faint drip echoes from somewhere ahead. As you follow the sound, you come upon a broken gutter that lets a thin stream of water fall into a shallow puddle. The droplets strike with a steady rhythm, creating ripples that shimmer faintly in the thin light. You step around them, feeling the cool air shift as the alley widens slightly and reveals a hidden courtyard. 3 women stand near a doorway, speaking softly as they sort through small piles of laundry. Their hands move quickly, rhythmically, their gestures filled with practiced familiarity. You catch a few words, but not enough to follow the conversation. They look tired but focused, as if this moment is only one of many repeating tasks within the long day. You continue past them and feel the ground change beneath your feet. The cobblestones here are cracked, revealing patches of dirt and stray bits of wood. You imagine that during storms the alley would flood easily, turning into a shallow stream of runoff from the wealthier streets uphill. People living here probably kept wooden planks ready to elevate their belongings when the water filled their homes. The thought makes you glance toward the small doorways, many only shoulder high, built for practicality rather than comfort. A gust of wind carries the smell of frying fish from a small cart tucked into the corner of the courtyard. A woman flips pieces of battered fish in a pot that sputters with heat. The scent is strong, but oddly soothing. People in poor areas often relied on cheap fried foods both for flavour and for warmth. You watch the oil bubble for a few seconds, listening to the soft hiss that rises above the background chatter. The vendor glances at you, briefly offering a quiet nod. Before returning to her work, you step away from the courtyard and enter another alley, this one darker and lined with wooden barrels. Some are sealed, while others are cracked, revealing scraps of produce inside. A rat scurries from one barrel to another. It disappears so quickly that you wonder if you imagined it. The city feels alive in every corner, each movement small but constant, each sound softened by the layered textures of the back streets. The fog thins further here, unable to settle in spaces so narrow. You can finally see your hands clearly in front of you. The bricks show their deep reddish brown, streaked with soot that refuses to fade even after rain. The windows are small, many, with missing panes repaired with cloth or paper. You picture the families inside using every scrap available to keep out the cold. Victorian poverty demanded creativity as much as endurance. You pause near a doorway where someone has chalked a simple shape on the wall. It might be a child's drawing or a coded message for neighbours. These alleys often held their own informal languages. Marks signalled which houses offered work, which ones should be avoided, and which ones had recently been visited by collectors or inspectors. You trace the chalk lightly, feeling the gritty texture beneath your fingertips. A soft cough echoes from behind you. You turn and see an elderly man sitting on a small stool near his doorway. His clothes are patched in many places. He gives you a cautious look, then offers a small greeting. You return it with a quiet nod. For a moment, the alley feels warmer, simply because recognition passes between you and a stranger. You walk on, leaving him to his quiet corner. As you move deeper, the respectable world feels increasingly distant. The polished facades on the main roads were never meant to reveal this maze, yet the two coexist only steps apart. People who lived in the bright streets relied on those who lived in the dark ones. Their worlds intertwined even if they pretended otherwise. You reach the end of the alley, and a faint breeze brushes your face. Ahead lies another street, slightly brighter. The fog begins to gather again, rising from the ground like a slow exhale. Victorian London continues to unfold before you layer by layer, drawing you into its hidden truths. You step out of the narrow alley and feel the air thicken again. The fog returns heavier now, carrying with it the unmistakable weight of coal dust. It floats invisibly at first, then gathers on your tongue like a faint dryness you cannot swallow away. Victorian London ran on coal. It powered homes, factories, ships, and even the imagination of people who believed industry would reshape the world forever. As you breathe in, you realize that progress here was not silent. It clung to every surface, stained every wall, and settled on every garment no matter how often it was brushed clean. The street ahead opens wider, giving the impression of relief, but the atmosphere only grows more oppressive. Coal dust hangs in the air, like a second skin catching the dim light, and forming a glittering haze that feels strangely beautiful until you remember what it is doing to your lungs. A carriage passes by, its iron wheels grinding against the stones. Each rotation kicks up another cloud of soot that rises and swirls before settling onto your coat. You brush it away, knowing it will return within moments. A woman hurries past you carrying a basket of freshly washed linens. The fabric should be white, bright, hopeful. Instead, it is already turning grey along the folds. She does not seem surprised. Victorian laundry workers learned quickly that nothing stayed clean for long. One mainstream historical fact reveals that even wealthy families struggled to maintain bright fabrics because coal soot seeped into fibres no matter how vigorously servants scrubbed. You glance at your own sleeve and understand the challenge instantly. You walk forward. The fog pulses softly, almost like the slow inhaling and exhaling of a massive creature. You feel your throat tighten a little as the particles settle deeper. It is not painful, just present, insistent, the kind of discomfort you can ignore for a while, but never escape completely. You imagine living your entire life here, waking up each morning to a layer of soot on your windowsill. Children in this city often wrote their names in coal dust as if it were chalk. One quirky tidbit mentions that some children even used soot to darken their hair for performances or pranks because it was always within reach. A distant whistle slices through the haze. Its call stretches across rooftops before fading into the muffled air. That whistle belongs to a steam train. Somewhere beyond the outlines of buildings, locomotives burn through mountains of coal, pushing smoke upward in great plumes that drift into the city and settle over its neighbourhoods like an ever-returning blanket. You picture the engines rumbling forward, pulling passengers and cargo through tunnels that would glow faintly orange from the heat of their furnaces. Victorian Londoners accepted this atmosphere as the price of advancement. It was a world defined by motion machinery and ambition. Yet scholars still debate how deeply coal pollution shaped the health crisis of the era. Some believe lung disease soared primarily because of the soot, while others suggest overcrowding and poor sanitation played an equally significant role. As you walk, you realize the truth likely rests somewhere in the overlap. The air here does not merely surround you, it infiltrates you. Your footsteps carry you past a row of modest homes where chimneys puff constantly. Some release steady streams of pale smoke, while others cough in irregular bursts like tired lungs. Coal was expensive for the poor, So many families bought the cheapest lumps they could find, often filled with impurities that produced even thicker and more toxic fumes. The smell shifts subtly depending on which chimney you pass. Some fires burn sweet and sharp, others reek of sulphur. The variety hints at the inconsistent quality of fuel available to different households. A boy stands outside one doorway, stacking small heaps of coal delivered earlier in the day. He arranges the pieces carefully, choosing the smoother lumps for indoor fires and the rougher ones for the kitchen stove. When he wipes his forehead, a streak of black forms instantly across his skin. He notices you watching and gives a shy nod before returning to his task. His hands are already darkened, the prints of his fingertips almost erased by the dust. Children like him often worked as coal runners, carrying heavy sacks through icy streets to supply families who could not afford larger deliveries. You keep moving and feel a gritty sensation beneath your boots. The ground is coated in a thin layer of soot that glitters faintly under the gas lamps. Every step stirs a small puff that rises around your ankles. You think about how this must have felt in warm weather when the dust would cling to sweat sticking to necks, arms, even eyelashes. No season offered relief. Winter trapped the smoke close to the ground. Summer turned it into swirling clouds. Rain transformed it into streaks that stained walls like black tears. You pause near a small bridge that crosses an open drainage channel. The water below appears dark and sluggish. Coal residue floats along the surface in oily patches that drift lazily with the current. The reflections of nearby lamps shimmer, distorted and broken. The smell is sharp and metallic, mixed with whatever else the city washes into the channel. You run your fingers along the railing and feel the rough layer of grime that coats it. Above you, a cluster of chimneys creates a jagged silhouette against the sky. Their smoke rises slowly, barely lifting, before it bends sideways under the weight of the fog. The effect makes the city feel low and compressed, as if a heavy ceiling hangs just above the rooftops. You take a breath and notice the air feels warmer near one building, probably because of a furnace working overtime inside. The warmth is inviting, but the smell warns you to keep walking. You pass a factory next. Its windows glow orange, each one flickering as though fire dances just behind the glass. Workers inside move like shadows, their silhouettes blurred by the haze trapped in the building. When the door opens briefly, a wave of heat rushes out, carrying with it the smell of burning coal mixed with hot iron. The combination tingles in your nose. You imagine the workers taking short breaks to lean outside, only to find that the fresh air is not fresh at all. For a moment the wind shifts. The fog parts slightly, revealing more of the road ahead. You can see pedestrians moving slowly, their outlines blurred but discernible. They walk with heads lowered, accepting that every inhale will feel heavy. You blend into their rhythm, letting your pace match the city's own steady pulse. The coal dust wraps around you one more time, soft yet unrelenting. You feel it settle on your shoulders, your hair, the back of your hands. You exhale and watch your breath drift upward, merging instantly with the haze. Victorian London teaches you gently that progress leaves marks, some visible, some hidden, all of them lingering in the air, long after the fires die down. You continue walking, letting the coal-scented fog guide you deeper into the city's truth. You move away from the coal-thickened street and step deeper into a part of the city that seems to fold inward like a clenched fist. This is the world of the rookeries, those hidden clusters of cramped tenements where thousands of Londoners lived stacked almost on top of one another. The moment you enter, the air changes. It feels warmer, heavier, touched by human breath, more than wind. Voices echo from every direction. Some are sharp, some soft, all woven together into a single restless hum that rises and falls like waves against stone. The passage you take is narrow enough that you could touch both walls without stretching your arms. The bricks feel smooth where countless hands have brushed them. Above you, the buildings lean slightly inward, as if conspiring with each other, trying to seal off what little sky remains. Laundry hangs so low, you need to duck beneath it. The fabric brushes your hair, cool and damp. The scent of soap mingles with something less pleasant, a hint of sourness. that comes from too many people sharing too little space. Your footsteps land on ground that is uneven and soft in certain patches. Bits of straw and refuse gather along the edges, where the cobblestones dip. The rookeries were notorious for overcrowding, and one well-documented detail from the period notes that a single house could shelter more than 30 individuals, sometimes strangers, who had never learned each other's names. You picture each room inside small, as they are holding families, lodgers, travellers, and those simply trying to survive until morning. As you wander onward, a narrow stairwell appears to your right, steep and shadowed. You can hear footsteps above you, rapid and light like someone running late for work. The boards creak, threatening to give way, but the person continues upward, confidently. Residents here learn to trust the fragile structures around them because they had no other choice. Even the walls, thin as they were, offered a sense of familiarity that comforted more than frightened. A curious footnote from the time mentions that landlords sometimes divided houses so aggressively that floorboards bowed under the pressure of overcrowding. You glance upward, wondering how many pairs of feet stand above you at this moment, how many sleep in beds pushed so closely that elbows and knees accidentally touch in the night. You turn a corner and enter a slightly wider courtyard where several families have gathered around a single pump. Water spurts unevenly, splashing into metal pails with a hollow ring that echoes off the walls. Children wait with thin patience, kicking at pebbles and scraps of wood. A girl in a patched dress holds a bucket nearly as large as she is. She looks at you with a mixture of curiosity and caution before returning her attention to the pump. Researchers still disagree on whether social bonds in these places were surprisingly strong or strained to breaking. You can see signs of both possibilities as you stand here. Some neighbours chat easily, trading jokes and small complaints about the day. Others keep their distance, eyes tired, bodies angled protectively around their belongings. Privacy is almost impossible in a rookery. A life lived so publicly can bring people together or push them apart, depending on the day, the mood, or the moment. You continue forward, absorbing the sensory patchwork of the space. The smell of cooking drifts from a window above. Something sizzling, perhaps onions or salted fish, mixes with the mustiness rising from the damp floors. A baby cries in one room, while a man laughs loudly in another. Someone sweeps vigorously nearby, pushing dust into the narrow centre of the alley, where it settles with a sigh. The constant movement, the constant noise, the constant presence of others create a rhythm that feels both chaotic and strangely intimate. In one doorway, an elderly woman sits on a stool mending clothes under the weak light that filters through a torn curtain. Her fingers move with surprising speed, stitching fabric that has already been repaired too many times to count. She glances up briefly, then offers a faint smile. You nod in return. The simple exchange makes you aware of how many lives pass through these corridors, without fanfare, without recognition, each one adding to the weight and texture of the rookery world. You step around a puddle caused by a broken pipe that trickles steadily along the edge of the alley. The water carries bits of debris, forming tiny eddies that sparkle in the dim light. It reminds you that sanitation here was a luxury. People lived close to open drains, shared limited water sources, and endured smells that clung stubbornly to walls and clothing. Yet even in this environment you sense resilience. Residents navigate their world with practiced ease, turning obstacles into routine. On the left, a small set of wooden steps leads to a cramped shop, where a woman sells household odds and ends. Buttons, candles, scraps of thread, cracked mugs all displayed on a makeshift counter. She greets a customer with a gentle tilt of her head. Her voice floats towards you, warm and steady. Shops like this were essential to daily survival. When goods were scarce or expensive in the main markets, people relied on these tiny vendors to keep their households functioning. You move deeper still, letting the rookery swallow you. The sounds settle around you like a blanket. Laughter mixes with argument, footsteps, with whispered conversations, clattering pans with the muffled thud of a door closing upstairs. There is no clear boundary between public and private life here. Everything spills into everything else. A boy darts past you holding a ragged ball. He calls for his friend, and the two of them race down the alley, weaving between pails and crates. Their joy cuts through the heaviness of the space, reminding you that childhood finds a way even in the most difficult places. Perhaps it is because children simply accept their environment without judgment. They carve out play where adults see only hardship. You pause near the end of the alley to observe one more detail. A makeshift clothesline stretches between two windows, sagging under the weight of garments, still dripping from the wash. Drops of water hit the stones with rhythmic taps. Each tap echoes softly, as if the rookery itself is exhaling, in small steady breaths. As you step out of the courtyard, the noise softens behind you. The rookery remains alive, humming with countless lives that will continue long after you leave. Victorian London does not hide its darker realities. It places them here in plain view for anyone willing to wander beyond the respectable facades. You take one last look at the leaning buildings, the narrow spaces, the dense weave of human activity, and then continue onward into the city's next layer of truth. Night folds itself over the city as you move away from the rookery's warmth and into a quieter stretch of London that does not stay quiet for long. Darkness here behaves differently. It does not simply dim the world. It amplifies the senses, drawing every sound into sharper focus. You pause for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the faint glow of distant lamps, and then you begin to notice the noises that reveal what official records rarely admitted. First comes a dull clatter, the scrape of metal against stone. It echoes faintly through the corridor ahead of you. Someone might be rummaging through discarded goods, searching for anything sellable. Poverty shaped the night as much as crime did. Many people scavenged simply to make it to morning. A firmly established record from the era points out that London at night was far more chaotic than its daytime reputation suggested. In the shadows, survival and lawlessness mingled so closely that it could be hard to tell them apart. A sharp whistle breaks the quiet next. It comes from a side street that appears empty when you glance toward it. The sound hangs in the air just long enough to make you wonder whether it was a signal. Street groups often use short-coded noises to warn each other when strangers approached. You take another step and the echo fades, swallowed by the fog and the dense walls that frame the alley. Then you hear footsteps. Not hurried, not fearful, simply steady and unhurried. They grow louder for a moment, then retreat again. Perhaps someone has changed direction after spotting your silhouette. Perhaps they only meant to cross the street. In this dimness, you never know. Researchers continue to question how much of the nocturnal tension in Victorian London came from actual criminals and how much came from the uneasy imagination of residents who could never quite see who walked beside them. Rumour and reality often overlapped until it became impossible to separate one from the other. You walk forward slowly, letting the city speak. The fog curls around your ankles again, softening the world into blurred shapes. Somewhere overhead, a window slams shut. The sound cracks sharply through the quiet bouncing between the walls. You picture someone leaning too far out, spotting movement and deciding that sleep is safer than curiosity. A soft shuffle comes from behind a crate near the corner. You stop listening carefully. A man steps out, glancing in your direction. His coat is worn, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He carries a small cloth bag, its shape suggesting that whatever is inside has weight. He nods to you, not unfriendly, just acknowledging a fellow traveller in the night. Then he slips away his feet, making almost no sound. People in these neighbourhoods learn to move with caution, not out of secrecy, but out of habit. Loud footsteps drew unwanted attention. An offbeat note from the time tells of residents who tied bits of cloth around their shoes to soften their steps at night. Not for stealth, but to avoid startling neighbours or waking children in homes where walls were too thin to contain sound. You imagine how many such small improvisations shaped the rhythm of nocturnal life. Another noise catches your attention, a muffled argument drifting from a nearby alley. Voices rise in short bursts, words too distant to understand. You sense frustration, maybe anger, but also routine resignation. Disputes over money, food, and space were common after sundown. The city did not sleep peacefully. It stirred with the weight of unresolved tensions that daylight merely concealed. As you keep walking, a sudden metallic jingle rings out. You turn and see a lamplighter extinguishing the final flame on his route. The light vanishes instantly, leaving the street deeper in shadow. Without that small glow, the sounds seem to grow stronger. You hear the distant roll of a carriage, the faint clip of hooves against uneven stones, a quiet cough from someone hidden in a doorway. The air smells different now, less like coal and more like cooling earth, mixed with the faint sweetness of cheap gin. Taverns nearby must have emptied recently. Patrons wander home with slow weaving steps, their voices drifting into the darkness. You catch a snippet of laughter, then silence. A door swings open somewhere behind you, releasing a burst of warmth and chatter before shutting again with a thud. You pass a narrow gap between two buildings. A single candle glows inside the space, illuminating a figure crouched low, sorting through a scoop of small metal scraps. Their hands move quickly, selecting pieces worth keeping. London's nighttime economy thrived on tiny exchanges like this, small transactions that never made their way into official ledgers but kept countless households afloat. You continue letting the sounds guide your imagination. The city at night feels like an orchestra without a conductor. Each noise carries its own meaning. A bottle breaking might signal a drunken quarrel. A rapid series of taps could be someone attempting to break a lock. A long, low hum might belong to a gathering of workers sharing news from the day. The night arranges itself into layers, each one revealing something the daytime refuses to acknowledge. Farther ahead, the wind shifts. You hear a soft cry followed by the rapid patter of footsteps. Two figures sprint across the street and vanish into the nearest passageway. Perhaps they snatched a purse. Perhaps they fled from an angry creditor. Perhaps it was something more innocent. The city produces thousands of stories each night, many of them never recorded their details, carried only in the memories of those who lived them. The streets feel both alive and watchful as you cross an open square that seems empty until your ears adjust. You hear the faint rattle of a window shutter banging gently in the breeze. You hear a dog barking far away. You hear the flutter of wings as a pigeon takes flight from a rooftop. Darkness heightens everything, sharpening your awareness until even the smallest sound feels meaningful. Yet for all its tensions, the nighttime city also holds a strange calm. The fog diffuses the lamplight into a soft halo. The uneven stones cool beneath your feet. The distant noises fade and return like a slow breathing pattern. Victorian London does not hide its troubles, but it carries them quietly woven into the fabric of its nighttime pulse. You walk on, surrounded by hints of danger, echoes of desperation, and the subtle comfort of a city that never truly sleeps. The night deepens and the sounds continue to unfold, guiding you toward the next truth, waiting in the shadows. You leave the restless night streets behind and drift toward another corner of Victorian London, where the darkness hides a more troubling sight. Here the city reveals a truth that sits heavy on the heart. Children move through the shadows like small ghosts shaped by necessity, their silhouettes too small for the burdens they carry. You pause at the mouth of a narrow lane and watch as a few of them slip past, each busy with tasks that should never belong to such young hands. The air feels colder in this part of town, as if the city itself is holding its breath. You hear a soft, dragging sound, followed by the faint shuffle of worn shoes. A boy no older than 7 pulls a wooden crate filled with coal scraps toward a workshop. His arms tremble with the effort, yet he keeps going without complaint. A firmly established record from the era notes that thousands of children work 10 or 12-hour days, often earning only enough to buy a small loaf of bread. As you watch the boy disappear into the workshop, you feel the weight of those hours pressing into the stones beneath your feet. Farther along, a girl hurries by carrying a stack of fabric pieces nearly as tall as she is. Her hair is tied back with a fraying ribbon, and her dress has been mended so often that no original seam remains. She moves quickly, not out of eagerness, but because she knows how the foreman scolds those who fall behind. You can see the faint outline of bruises on her forearm, though she keeps it hidden beneath the cloth she carries. A small alley opens to your right. Inside, several children crouch near a dim oil lamp, sorting metal scraps into neat piles. Their fingers move with quiet precision. They barely speak, conserving energy for a task that will continue until the lamp burns out. One child coughs softly, the sound edged with exhaustion. The others do not react. In these cramped spaces, silence becomes a kind of survival. You step closer and notice the way their faces reflect the lamp's weak light. Shadows cling to the hollows beneath their eyes. One girl glances up long enough to acknowledge you, then returns instantly to her work. She must be no older than 12. A curious footnote from the period mentions that some children dipped their fingertips in vinegar to harden the skin, so the sharp metal edges would not slice them as easily. You look at the girl's hands, small and restless, and imagine how many tiny cuts disappear beneath the soot. You move onward and hear footsteps behind you, lighter and quicker than adult steps. A group of boys races past each, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Their eyes shine with a mixture of mischief and hunger. These children run errands for shopkeepers, factory workers, and sometimes for people with less honest intentions. They are fast because they have to be. Speed means employment. Hesitation means losing a precious coin. A low doorway stands open nearby. Inside, a handful of children work at a long table sorting buttons, trimming loose threads, and turning piles of discarded cloth into something usable. The air is thick with lint. It clings to your skin the moment you step near the entrance. The oldest child supervises the rest, though he cannot be more than 14. He glances at you, offering a cautious nod before returning to his task. Academic circles continue to debate the true reach of child labour in London slums. Some believe the numbers were underestimated because children often worked for neighbours or small workshops that kept no official records. Others argue that the scale was exaggerated in certain reform writings. Standing here watching so many young bodies bent over tedious tasks, you feel the truth settles somewhere between those arguments. Numbers matter less than the lives they represent. You keep walking until you reach the edge of a tannery yard. The smell hits you first, sharp and sour, but the sight that follows is worse. Several children stir vats with long wooden rods while trying to keep their balance on slick boards. The liquid inside the vats looks dark and muddy. The fumes drift upward in slow spirals, making your throat tighten. The children work silently, their faces blank with concentration. One boy pauses to wipe his eyes, then grips the pole again and continues stirring. You back away gently, not wanting your presence to distract them. The smell lingers even after you leave the yard. It settles into your clothes like a reminder. A quieter street opens ahead. Here the buildings are taller and the spaces between them narrower. A few children sit near a doorway, half asleep, but still waiting for their next task. One holds a broom, almost too large for him. Another hugs a small sack of rags to her chest. Their eyes droop, their bodies slumped. The stones beneath them are cold, yet they doze in short bursts, unwilling to go home until they have earned enough to satisfy whoever waits for them there. You hear a soft whimper. A younger child leans against the wall, rubbing his hands together for warmth. He looks tired enough to collapse. A girl beside him takes his hand and rubs it between her own palms, sharing what little heat she has. It is a quiet gesture, almost invisible in the gloom, but it shines briefly against the darkness. As you walk deeper into this part of the city, the sounds shift again. You hear the clatter of machinery from a workshop where child apprentices learn trades that demand more strength than they possess. You hear the tired hum of voices drifting from small rooms where children sew into the night. You hear the steady tapping of nails being hammered by tiny hands into wooden soles destined for someone who will never know who shaped them. You move slowly, letting each sound settle inside you. This world is not hidden exactly. It is simply overlooked, absorbed into the city's routine. Adults pass by without turning their heads. Employers watch children work without seeing the ache in their shoulders. Even reformers, however earnest, cannot reach every doorway. You step into a wider lane, at last one lit by a flickering lamp. The children around you begin to thin out as they retreat into cramped rooms for a few hours of rest before dawn returns them to the same tasks. Their footsteps soften, their whispers fade, and soon the street grows quiet again. Victorian London grows larger with each truth you discover, yet more intimate at the same time. In the shadows among the smallest workers, you begin to understand the weight of a city that relied on hands barely strong enough to carry their own futures. You continue forward, the night deepening around you, the path drawing you toward the next hidden corner. You step into a quieter district now, one where the streets widen slightly, yet the air feels no safer. Victorian London, after dark, posed particular challenges for women, and as you walk, you begin to sense how carefully they moved through this world. Every street corner seems to carry a subtle tension, as if the shadows themselves are waiting to test whoever dares to pass through them alone. A lone woman appears ahead of you. Her figure is wrapped in a shawl pulled tightly across her shoulders. She walks with a purposeful stride, not hurried, but undeniably alert. Her eyes track every sound, every movement, every flicker of lamplight. You can almost hear her thoughts weighing the safest path, assessing the distance to the next doorway, measuring the quiet behind her. As you follow the curve of the street, you understand why her vigilance runs so deep. Women here lived between opportunity and danger in a way few contemporary stereotypes ever capture. Many period reports consistently describe the constant risk women faced when navigating London's sprawling streets. It was not simply the fear of crime itself, but the imbalance of power woven through the city's social fabric. The woman ahead of you adjusts her pace when a pair of men rounds the corner. She does not look directly at them yet. She senses their presence, instantly shifting slightly toward the brighter side of the street, where a lamp still burns. A small but peculiar note from the period mentions that some women carried handfuls of pepper or fine ash in their pockets, not as a weapon, but as a quick distraction to throw into the face of anyone who came too close. You imagine how many times such a simple measure offered a few precious seconds to escape an unwanted advance. You picture fingers curled around the gritty powder, a silent promise of self-protection. You walk deeper into the neighbourhood and see a young maid leaving her employer's home. She steps into the street with tired eyes and a lantern in her hand. The flame flickers against the breeze, struggling to stay alive. Her posture reveals everything. Long hours, low wages, the pressure of expectation, and the awareness that the moment she leaves the safety of that well-lit doorway, she becomes yet another figure, moving through a world that seldom makes space for her comforts. She holds her lantern close, shielding it with her palm as she walks. Each time someone passes near her, she lowers her gaze slightly and shifts toward the wall, giving up more than half the road without complaint. Women of her class were taught to make themselves small, to move quietly, to navigate the city as though apologizing for taking up space. Yet beneath the timid gestures lies a core of resilience, the kind that grows unspoken in places where survival depends on constant intuition. As you follow her path, the sounds around you settle into a loose pattern. Footsteps approaching footsteps, fading, the distant rumble of a conveyance, a faint laugh drifting from an upper window. The maid pauses in front of a narrow alley, assessing it before choosing a longer route instead. She knows which corners hold friendly neighbours and which ones attract the sort of men who linger too long at the entrance of taverns. Modern scholarship is still divided on whether these nightly strategies were passed informally among women or simply learned through experience. Some believe older women taught younger ones how to read the streets, while others argue that every woman developed her own mental map through trial and error. Whichever is true, the patterns they followed were subtle but deliberate, shaped by knowledge that rarely made its way into official history. You reach a small square where a few women gather near a fountain that barely trickles. They speak in low voices, sharing the last scraps of gossip before heading home. One carries a basket filled with the day's unsold flowers. Another adjusts the shawl wrapped around her head, preparing herself for the walk to a distant lodging house. Their conversation feels soft but steady, a kind of communal recalibration that lets them breathe more freely for a moment before scattering again into the night. As they part ways, you notice that each one chooses a route different from the others. The flower seller disappears into a busy lane where tavern doors swing open and shut. The woman with the shawl turns down a quieter path lit by a single lamp. The third vanishes into a cluster of buildings where the fog grows thicker. Their choices reflect not randomness, but knowledge. They know where they are safer, where they are not, and where the chances tilt ever so slightly in their favour. A few steps later, you pass a row of small workshops. Through the window of one, a seamstress still works despite the late hour. Her needle flashes in the lamplight, rising and falling steadily. Many women relied on work like this, stitching into the evening, to meet impossible quotas for pitiful pay. Yet the rhythm of her hands seems to steady her, as if the familiar motion offers its own small comfort against the uncertainties outside. A faint commotion rises from a nearby pub. Laughter, then shouting, then the abrupt scrape of a chair. The seamstress pauses, listening. She sets her needle down for a moment before cautiously closing her shutters. You feel the shift in the air as she does. The pub's noise belongs to the kind of night she wishes to avoid. Her instincts guide her long before danger reaches her door. You continue walking until the street opens near a bridge. A woman stands there alone, staring at the dark water below. Her posture reveals exhaustion, not despair, and when she turns away from the river, she straightens her shoulders with new resolve. Women here often carried more weight than anyone acknowledged, yet they walked forward anyway, one careful step at a time. As the night deepens, the streets grow quieter, but never truly silent. Each woman you saw carried her own world of worries and strengths. The risks never disappeared, but neither did the resourcefulness that helped them navigate this unpredictable city. You keep moving, guided now by the echo of their footsteps, feeling the story of Victorian London expand with every path they carved through the shadows. You leave the dim streets behind and drift toward a district where the air feels strangely still, as if the city is holding back a truth it prefers not to voice. Victorian London lived with illness, the way other places lived with weather. It arrived quietly settled into homes without knocking and lingered long after the first symptoms appeared. As you walk, you begin to notice a faint sourness in the air, mixed with dampness that clings to your skin. It is not dramatic. It is the subtle warning of a world where sickness travels through cracks, puddles, whispers, and unwashed hands. You pass a row of houses with their shutters drawn, though the lamps inside burn faintly behind the fabric. People often kept to themselves when someone in the household grew sick, not out of cruelty, but out of instinct. The streets outside may have carried danger, yet the true threats often hid inside narrow rooms, packed with family members breathing the same stale air. A commonly accepted reality of the time was that many neighbourhoods lived in perpetual risk due to contaminated water sources. You see it now as you approach a public pump standing at the edge of a crossroads. Its handle is worn smooth from constant use. A thin stream of water has pooled beneath it, forming a damp patch that smells faintly of rot. A woman fills her bucket without hesitation. She pauses only to glance at a child coughing nearby, then moves quickly away as if distance alone can protect her. You continue forward, listening to the city exhale in measured breaths. Not every cough here signals danger, yet each one catches your attention. In tight spaces, sound spreads easily, carrying more meaning than words. You hear a low moan from a nearby window, muffled by a curtain. You hear the slow footsteps of a man supporting someone too weak to walk alone. You hear the gentle clink of glass as an apothecary prepares a bitter tonic that may soothe symptoms but rarely cures them. A strange sliver of domestic folklore proposes that keeping a slice of onion beneath the bed would absorb illness before it reached the body. You picture someone placing the onion there with quiet hope, convinced that its layers might capture invisible threats drifting through the stale night air. Whether it helped or not hardly mattered. When fear mingles with uncertainty, even the smallest ritual can feel like protection. You turn down a corridor where the smell intensifies. The moisture in the air thickens. Somewhere close by, a feverish patient breathes with shallow rhythm. You can almost feel their heat radiating through the brick. In this world of close quarters, fever spread far faster than knowledge. People shared beds, bowls, clothing, and air. Separation was a luxury few could afford. Debate within the historical community persists over whether residents truly understood how disease travelled. Some argue they sensed connections between contaminated water and illness, while others believe these insights remained limited to small groups of reformers. As you walk, you realise the truth lies in observation rather than education. People noticed patterns. They saw entire households fall sick after using certain wells. They saw that washing hands mattered, even if they could not explain why. Understanding grew slowly, shaped not by science at first, but by lived experience. You approach a small courtyard, where a physician in a long coat stands beside a doorway. He carries a leather bag, filled with tools that clink softly when he moves. A line of worried faces watches from a distance. They do not step closer. They do not speak. They simply wait to see if the news he carries will bring relief or dread. When he disappears into the house, the courtyard seems to inhale sharply, as though bracing itself. You move on, stepping past a gutter where stagnant water reflects the faint lamplight. The surface trembles as a rat skitters along the edge. Rats moved freely through London, thriving in the waste that accumulated faster than it could be removed. Their presence whispers more than discomfort. It hints at deeper issues beneath the city's orderly facade. A quiet, scuffling sound draws your attention to a doorway where a woman helps a child settle onto a thin mattress. The child's eyes are half closed, their breaths shallow. The woman smooths their hair gently, whispering something soft enough that you cannot hear it. Maybe comfort, maybe prayer. The moment feels suspended, a fragile pause in a world that rarely stops for anything. You continue down the lane, watching how illness shapes the landscape. Windows stay shut, doors open just wide enough to pass bowls of broth or damp rags. People lower their voices instinctively, as if loud speech might disturb whatever fragile balance keeps their home safe for another night. In one tiny house, a man leans over a basin of steaming herbs, inhaling slowly. Steam curls around his face, mixing with lamplight. Remedies like this offered temporary ease. Mint, rosemary, lavender vinegar. Simple ingredients that promised relief even when real cures remained distant. A little farther on, you come upon an apothecary shop where bottles line the shelves, like small guardians of hope. Inside, a woman mixes powders with careful precision. Her mortar and pestle tap a steady rhythm echoing through the quiet. She is not a doctor, but in neighbourhoods like this, her knowledge holds immense value. People trust her remedies because they see her daily working tirelessly behind her small counter. As you stand at the threshold, you watch her wrap a small bundle of herbs for a worried mother. The exchange is quick. A few coins pass hands. The door closes behind the mother, who rushes home to care for someone unseen but clearly suffering. The street grows colder as you move on. Illness rarely travelled alone. Fatigue, hunger, dampness, and smoke weakened bodies long before disease found them. You notice how many people walk with a slight slump in their shoulders, how many wear expressions of quiet endurance rather than fear. In Victorian London, sickness was not an exception. It was part of the landscape, rising and falling like tides. You pause at a corner and listen to the distant rumble of a carriage carrying someone wealthy enough to flee toward cleaner districts. Yet the poorer neighbourhoods remain still breathing in and out with the rhythm of survival. The city does not hide its fragility, it simply wraps it in fog shadow and the steady footsteps of those who keep moving, despite everything. You take a final breath of the cool night air, feeling how heavy it sits on your chest. Then you continue forward, ready to discover the next truth waiting within the winding streets. You head toward the river now, following a faint shift in the wind that smells slightly different from the crowded streets behind you. At first, the scent feels clean, almost refreshing, as if the night air coming off the Thames might give you a brief moment of relief, but the closer you walk, the more that illusion unravels. Victorian London's river is not the gentle ribbon sung about in poetry. It is a restless, murky presence that carries the city's secrets, its refuse, and the consequences of decisions made far from its banks. You descend a small slope and feel the ground soften beneath your feet. The stones near the waterline stay slick long after the tide has receded. Even in the dim light, you can see the wet sheen glistening like a warning. A faint gurgling reaches your ears. Not the crisp splash of clean water, but a thicker, slower churn that hints at what lies beneath the surface. Archival records point clearly to the fact that the Thames became heavily polluted during the height of industrial expansion. As you approach that, truth rises with unmistakable force. The river smells of rot chemicals, spoiled food, and something metallic that clings to the back of your throat. The odour grows stronger in layers, each step revealing a new, unpleasant note. You draw a slow breath, adjusting to a scent that thousands of Londoners smelled daily without the option of escape. A lantern swings from a post nearby, casting a trembling reflection across the river. The distortions in the water make the light look as though it is shivering. You kneel for a moment and watch debris float by. Twigs, scraps of cloth, bits of straw, even unidentifiable shapes softened by the current. The tide carries these offerings with calm indifference, sweeping them toward whatever awaits downstream. A faintly humorous anecdote from the time recalls that some Londoners claimed they could taste the river in the milk they bought from vendors whose cows grazed near the water's edge. Whether they exaggerated or not, the idea settles into your imagination with an uncomfortable weight. You glance at the dark surface and imagine what it must have been like to live with that constant presence, knowing it seeped into food, clothing, and everyday life. You step closer to the embankment and notice how the river moves. It bulges in slow, uneven waves that bump gently against the stones. The sound should be calming, yet there is something unsettling about it. Perhaps it is the knowledge that beneath those ripples lies a toxic brew of sewage, industrial waste, and runoff from crowded streets. You picture pipes draining directly into the water, carrying whatever households and factories discard without thought. Some investigators challenge the belief that city officials ignored the river's condition entirely. Certain records show attempts at improvement, while others suggest that reforms lagged behind because the scale of the problem seemed too vast to confront. As you stand here, you sense how easily a city can grow accustomed to its own discomforts, especially when they spread, gradually blending into the background until they seem inevitable. A small boat drifts near the opposite bank. Its oars cut through the surface with a slow rhythm. The rower appears as a silhouette hunched slightly against the effort. Perhaps he's a night ferryman finishing his shift. Perhaps he carries goods that cannot wait until morning. River workers operated in conditions most people avoided, yet they relied on the Thames for their livelihood. You watch as the boat glides through the oily water, leaving faint trails that close again behind it. You continue walking along the bank, your feet crunching against discarded shells and bits of broken pottery. The river once supported oyster beds, but those days have long passed. Now these fragments wash ashore like relics from a cleaner world that exists only in memory. The wind picks up, carrying a damp chill that sinks through your clothing. You rub your hands together, trying to warm your fingers as you move along the embankment. In the distance, you hear laughter rising from a riverside tavern. Its warm glow spills onto the street, but even here, the foul smell intrudes, reminding everyone that the water beside them holds more danger than charm. Yet people gather anyway. They drink, they talk, they sing over the sounds of the tide. Life persists in every corner of this city, even when the air itself seems unwelcoming. A man stands near the shore with a long pole poking at something tangled among the driftwood. He mutters to himself, tugging at a scrap of rope or fabric stuck between stones. Rag collectors search the riverbanks, constantly hoping to find anything that can be sold or repurposed. Their silhouettes, bent toward the ground, seem woven into the landscape. You watch as he frees the tangled object and holds it up briefly before tossing it into a sack. Then he moves on, humming softly. Farther down, a woman washes clothes in a small metal basin filled with river water. You pause, startled by the sight, but she goes about her task with steady determination. Clean water is scarce, and for many families, the Thames remains the only accessible source. She scrubs forcefully, dipping the cloth again and again. The suds that spill from the basin form pale streaks on the stones. When she finishes, she wrings the garment tightly and drapes it across a nearby railing. Her hands move quickly, practiced and unbothered by the chill. You step away from her, continuing along the curve of the river. Your boots splash in shallow puddles left by the earlier tide. Each splash sends up a faint scent of mud, mixed with decay. You sense the river breathing around you, not calm or gentle, but persistent, as if reminding the city of its presence each time the current shifts. As you move under a low arch of a bridge, the sound of water grows deeper, fuller. The shadows multiply, wrapping themselves around the pillars. You see carvings and graffiti etched into the stone, some recent, some faded. People have left their marks here for decades, writing initial symbols or simple declarations of existence. These small traces cling to the bridge with quiet stubbornness, surviving even when the river beneath threatens to wash everything else away. You emerge from the arch and find a group of fishermen gathered near a lit brazier. They warm their hands over the glowing coals while keeping an eye on their lines cast into the dark water. Their faces show weary patience. They know the river's offerings are meagre at best, yet they wait anyway. Fresh fish fetch a good price, even when caught in questionable water. You watch the fishermen for a moment, noticing their quiet camaraderie. They speak in brief murmurs, sharing stories of earlier catches or long nights when the river refused to yield even a single bite. Their lanterns sway gently in the breeze, casting a soft glow across the rippling surface. Then slowly you step away, letting the sounds fade behind you. The Thames continues to mutter and churn, carrying the city's burdens with relentless momentum. Its presence shapes everything around it, even when people pretend not to see what flows beneath the surface. As you leave the embankment, you feel the faint vibration of the tide shifting again. The river breathes out a damp sigh that follows you back toward the streets, lingering like a memory the city refuses to forget. You leave the dark riverside behind and drift toward a brighter stretch of the city, where noise hums even at night. Victorian markets were living creatures, shifting with the needs of the poor and the wealthy alike. As you approach, the air changes. It grows busier, richer, with scents both pleasant and alarming. You catch the sharp tang of vinegar, the warmth of freshly baked bread, the sour note of spoiled vegetables, and the unmistakable musk of animals kept too long in cramped corners. This is not a polite marketplace for leisurely strolling. It is a place built on survival. Lamps illuminate the area in soft patches, revealing clusters of stalls arranged with barely enough space for people to squeeze through. Vendors call out softly, their voices tired from a long day of bargaining. Goods lie piled on wooden tables, worn down by endless hands. Some items look familiar. Others appear so strange that you need a moment to understand what you're seeing. One frequently cited fact among social historians is that markets in poorer districts often doubled as the final stop for goods rejected elsewhere in the city. Meat trimmed too thin vegetables, days past their prime bread that had turned tough enough to thump against the counter. Yet people bought them because they had no choice. You stand before a butcher's stall, where a man arranges cuts of mutton, brushing away flies with a leafy branch. His movements are calm and practiced. He greets a customer, weighing their coins carefully, then slices a piece of meat with decisive confidence. A few stalls farther on, a woman sells bowls of hot stew from a dented metal pot that bubbles gently over a small flame. The aroma of onions and herbs wraps around you, warm enough to make your stomach tighten. The stew looks thin, but for many families, it might be the most substantial meal of the day. You watch the woman as she ladles the liquid into chipped bowls, her hand steady despite the cold. Music drifts through the market, faint and uneven. A man plucks at a worn fiddle, hoping for coins from passers-by. Children gather near him, swaying slightly in rhythm. Their laughter mixes with the traders' calls, creating a soundscape full of life despite the hardships around it. The market feels like a temporary refuge, a place where fear pauses long enough to let people bargain, eat, gossip, and breathe. A peculiar sliver of street folklore asserts that buying fish right after sunset brought better luck, not because the fish were fresh, but because vendors were more likely to bargain generously in their exhaustion. You watch as a woman approaches a stall piled with small fish shimmering under the lantern light. The vendor begins haggling, with her voice, low movements, brisk. The exchange lasts only a few seconds before she leaves, with a paper parcel tucked under her shawl. You continue walking, weaving through clusters of people. A man in a patched coat sells roasted chestnuts from a metal pan that glows faintly red from the coals beneath. The chestnuts crackle as he stirs them. Their scent is warm, nutty, comforting, and for a moment you forget the smell of the river, the sickness in the alleys, the coal dust drifting through the air. You buy nothing, but the vendor gives you a nod anyway, acknowledging your presence in the slow rhythm of his night. Further in, the goods become stranger still. A seller displays jars filled with odd mixtures, dried herbs, strange powders, bits of root. She insists they cure fevers, sharpen appetite, or calm restless spirits. People purchase them cautiously. Remedies rarely come with guarantees, yet desperation encourages belief. She handles each jar with reverence, as if she knows secrets the city has long forgotten. Interpretations differ sharply on the question of whether these marketplaces were truly chaotic or simply misunderstood by wealthier observers who never set foot in them. Some describe them as dangerous labyrinths full of swindlers and thieves. Others insist they were hubs of resourcefulness, creativity, and mutual support. Standing here, you sense a bit of both realities intertwined. There is risk in every corner, yet there is also ingenuity, a willingness to stretch every coin as far as it will go. You pass a baker's stall next. The man behind it brushes flour from his hands and sets out loaves that vary in shape and quality. Some are soft, still warm. Others are hard enough to be sliced only with effort. Yet nothing goes to waste. Families soak old bread in broth or tea to soften it, turning it into something edible again. The baker smiles at a small boy who approaches with 2 pennies tightly clenched in his fist. He selects a loaf slightly larger than the price would usually allow and hands it over without comment. At the edge of the market, you notice a row of makeshift stalls selling clothes. Dresses patched so many times, the original fabric barely shows. Coats missing buttons, hats with their brims softened from rain. People pick through them, carefully seeking warmth more than beauty. A young woman inspects a wool shawl, rubbing it between her fingers to judge its thickness. After a brief negotiation, she hands over a few coins and wraps the shawl around her shoulders immediately. You move past baskets of apples that look bruised but still sweet, past piles of carrots with their tops already trimmed away, past crates filled with scrap metal, old nails, frayed rope, and any item that might find a second life in someone's home. The market is a mosaic of necessity. Everything here holds value because someone somewhere might make use of it. A cluster of children gathers near a man selling tiny pastries. He offers them at a price even the poorest can sometimes afford. The children share their coins and divide a single pastry into 4 small pieces. They laugh, delighted with their purchase, as if they had bought treasure. Their joy softens the edges of the night. You take another slow step, breathing in the thick mix of smells. Markets like this one shaped the heartbeat of Victorian London. They were where the city revealed its ingenuity, its hunger, its fatigue, and its unbreakable desire to survive another day. As you leave the market, the sounds fade behind you. The faint echo of bargaining, the soft clatter of crates being packed away, the last hiss of roasting chestnuts. All of it dissolves into the night as the city prepares to show you its next hidden truth. You leave the fading sounds of the market behind and step into a stretch of London where the night grows heavier, quieter, and more secretive. Here work continues long after most households have banked their fires. You sense an older rhythm moving through the dark, the kind of rhythm shaped not by industry or commerce, but by tasks no one wants to witness in daylight. The city relies on these labourers, yet rarely acknowledges them. They move through alleys and churchyards, like shadows fulfilling duties too uncomfortable to name. Your feet follow a path that curves between high stone walls. The fog thins just enough for you to glimpse silhouettes where you least expect them. A man with a long rake stands near a mound of soot beside a brick kiln. He scrapes slowly, gathering the still warm ash into baskets. It is a strange job, yet essential. Ash strengthens mortar, softens certain dyes, and fills countless household needs. He wipes his brow with the back of his hand and nods as you pass. His eyes reveal fatigue deeper than the night. A few steps farther on, you hear a rhythmic tapping. You round a corner and see a woman breaking old bones into smaller pieces with a hammer. The shards will be sold to soap makers or fertilizer dealers. Her movements are precise, efficient, practiced through years of necessity. Numerous official reports consistently emphasized that trades like hers formed the invisible backbone of city economies. Watching her work, you understand why. The city's apparent order depends on people like her, though their names seldom appear in ledgers. You continue down the lane, noticing how the buildings rise tightly around you. It feels like walking through the hollow interior of a giant organism, each worker performing a task that keeps the whole alive. The air grows colder as you approach a churchyard wall. A faint metallic scent lingers here, mixed with damp earth. It carries a quiet story only the night chooses to tell. A quietly humorous aside in a memoir indicates that some graveyard workers claim the fog made their jobs easier as it softened the ground and masked the sounds of their shovels. Whether they joke to cope with fear or simply sought a moment of levity is unclear, but the image stays in your mind as you step closer to the iron gate. Inside the churchyard, a pair of men move with careful coordination. Their lantern casts oblong shadows across tilted gravestones. You watch from a respectful distance as they repair a collapsed section of fence. Graveyards are not silent places in Victorian London. They are workplaces after sunset, places where caretakers mend walls, level earth, and reposition stones loosened by time. The men speak quietly, their words drifting toward you in a soft murmur. Analysts examining the period often dispute whether these nighttime activities fed frightening rumours or simply maintained the city's practical needs. Some argue the secrecy led to stories of grave robbers long after that trade had faded, while others believe the quiet labour itself fostered a sense of superstition. Standing here, you sense how easily the imagination expands in the dark. You keep walking, and the path narrows again. Ahead, a thin figure pushes a handcart filled with buckets. The liquid inside sloshes with each bump in the road. He gathers waste from houses and delivers it to outlying fields at dawn. His work is harsh but essential for maintaining the fragile balance of sanitation in crowded districts. He does not speak as he passes you, though he offers a small nod of acknowledgement. His presence reminds you that the city's survival depends on tasks many prefer not to think about. Beyond him, you notice a group of night scavengers crouched near a pile of discarded materials. They sort silently, pulling out bits of rope, broken tools, fragments of leather, anything that can be repaired and resold. Their fingers move with astonishing speed. Letters and diaries from the time repeatedly note that these nocturnal workers often displayed remarkable skill in recognizing value where others saw only waste. You watch one woman lift a dented metal lid with a triumphant grin as if she has found treasure. You drift onward, your footsteps blending with the soft sounds of labour surrounding you. The city seems to breathe differently in this hidden zone. The streets are not dangerous in the loud dramatic sense. Instead, they feel solemn, filled with the quiet determination of people whose jobs do not align with the rising and setting of the sun. Their work flows with the deeper currents of London, the ones that rarely reach the daylight surface. As you approach the far end of the district, you hear the slow rumble of a wagon. Two men guide a horse through the lane, collecting piles of scrap that other workers have prepared. Their lantern casts a warm glow across the cobblestones. They speak in soft tones, pausing occasionally to lift heavy bundles into the wagon. Their partnership appears steady, forged by long nights of repetition and trust. The wagon moves on, and the lane grows quiet. You continue walking, feeling the weight of the city's hidden labour settle around you. Everything you have seen tonight forms a fragile ecosystem, one sustained by people who work while others sleep. Their tasks are difficult sometimes, unpleasant, often invisible, yet essential to keeping Victorian London functioning. You take a final look at the dim churchyard behind you, the faint glow of a lantern swinging gently between the stones. Then you step forward, leaving the night workers to their long hours, and moving toward the next secret, waiting in the city's restless dark. You move away from the churchyard and step into streets where light seems hesitant to linger. Gas lamps flicker, as if unsure of their own purpose. Shadows gather around corners and doorways, stretching themselves across the cobbles in strange, unpredictable ways. Here in the quieter sections of Victorian London, the city relies on its watchmen to enforce order, yet their abilities were limited. You can sense it as you walk, the inefficiency folded into the rhythm of the night, the awareness that danger could appear anywhere unnoticed. A widely supported observation from the period indicates that many watchmen patrolling the streets carried little more than a lantern and a staff. Their visibility was poor, their coverage limited, and their training minimal. You watch one man trudge along a narrow lane, his eyes squinting at a dim window. He nods at a passerby, then continues, slowly oblivious to the shadows shifting just beyond his reach. You feel the city's tension quietly pressing in on both of you, a reminder that authority alone does not guarantee safety. A small but memorable oddity recorded in a few journals says that some watchmen carried wooden rattles to signal danger, using them instead to scare off stray animals or amuse themselves on long nights. You imagine the clatter echoing down these alleys, a sound meant for human alert, but often misunderstood, adding an element of theatre to otherwise mundane duties. You pass a narrow courtyard where a faint clamour rises from behind a locked gate. The watchman pauses, glances in your direction, then shrugs and moves on. His lantern swings slightly, illuminating the cobbles unevenly. The city feels alive but elusive, as though it is aware of your attention. He is present but unable to see the full scope of what happens under his watch. Some doors open briefly, children peek from windows, animals shift in the dark, all unfolding without his notice. Researchers have not reached full agreement on whether the watchman significantly reduced crime or merely provided the illusion of security. Some argue that their presence discouraged petty theft, while others contend that serious criminal activity largely went unchecked. As you walk, you realize that both perspectives hold truth. The night unfolds, with both oversight and blind spots, each event shaped by its own set of consequences. You continue down the lane. The fog rolls softly around the buildings, muffling sound, yet making sudden noises startlingly clear. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorts and shakes its harness. A shutter claps against the wall in the breeze. You hear the distant scrape of a cart, the soft murmur of people speaking behind closed doors. The watchman lags behind in the sequence of events, unable to record or intervene in every movement that matters. A curious micro-custom mentioned in a reformer's diary recounts that some households hung small bells at their doorways, so the watchman would hear them if mischief approached. These bells were intended to summon attention quickly, yet they often went unnoticed amid the chorus of street sounds. You listen closely, imagining the faint jingling ringing unnoticed by the lone figure trudging through his nightly beat. The man finally stops at a corner and peers down a long street. You see only the faint silhouette of another figure disappearing into an alleyway. He frowns, mutters something under his breath, and continues on, never catching the details that matter most. You notice the subtle tension in his shoulders. Even those tasked with oversight cannot see everything, and the city thrives on the gaps between perception and reality. Beyond the watchman, you see a small gathering near a bakery. The oven glows faintly through a window, casting warm light on the cobbles outside. The people converse in hushed tones, swapping news and advice. In daylight, these gatherings might seem ordinary, but at night they exist in parallel to authority protected by the watchman's limited reach. Life continues quietly, slipping under the radar of any formal oversight. Academic viewpoints diverge significantly regarding whether these nocturnal patrols were primarily symbolic or functional. Some suggest that their presence merely reassured citizens, while others maintain that their vigilance prevented at least minor offences. Standing here listening to footsteps, hushed conversations, and the occasional rattle of a distant cart, you feel how both ideas coexist in this tangled urban ecosystem. A dog barks somewhere off the main street, a sound sharp and sudden. The watchman glances in that direction, but does not investigate. You recognize the pattern. Animals, children, workers, and criminals alike interact in ways the watchman cannot fully trace. His role is essential, yet inherently limited, a human figure enmeshed in a network too complex for one person to contain. As you walk past him and continue into the fog, you feel the city's pulse slow and then expand. The night is alive with sounds, movements, and unseen interactions. Each step reveals more of the environment the watchman cannot control. You understand that the city's true safety lies not only in its patrolling, but in the rhythms, habits, and instincts of all who live within its reach. You keep moving, guided by the knowledge that vigilance is only one part of survival. The streets continue to whisper, echoing the quiet stories of those who navigate the shadows with care and determination. You follow a narrow lane where the faint glow of gas lamps barely reaches the ground. Shadows crawl along the walls, elongating and shrinking as the light wavers in the night. Here you feel the pulse of a different world, one where the city's hidden energy is concentrated in the movement of groups operating just beneath the surface. You hear the muffled laughter of young men gathering in small clusters, their voices carrying hints of mischief and menace. This is the half-light of Victorian London, where gangs establish their territories quietly, but with unmistakable authority. Records from the period make it evident that street gangs were a persistent feature of poor districts, often controlling narrow alleys and market corners. You watch a group of youths leaning against a brick wall. Their postures are relaxed yet alert. They glance at each passerby, measuring whether attention warrants acknowledgement or avoidance. The faint shuffle of their boots on the cobbles sounds almost ceremonial, marking their presence as both warning and claim. A peculiar observation recorded in a diary mentions that some gang members carried small pouches of flour or chalk. They would toss it into the faces of rivals to create a brief distraction, allowing for a quick escape or a sudden rearrangement of dominance. You imagine the sudden white cloud puffing across a dark alley, the startled expressions, and the subtle power it grants in a world built on quick reflexes. You step closer to the edge of their circle, careful not to draw notice. Their eyes flick briefly in your direction. Perhaps they see you, perhaps not. Even in the half-light, the city rewards intuition. You can sense the unspoken rules, who may pass without question, who must move with caution, and who will be stopped simply to assert the neighbourhood's invisible boundaries. Academic discussion persists regarding whether these gangs were primarily criminal or social in nature. Some researchers contend they were violent networks focused on theft and control. Others suggest they functioned as quasi-community groups, offering protection and enforcing local order when authorities could not or would not. As you linger in the lane, you feel both truths simultaneously. These young men enforce rules, protect their own, and define space that official law leaves unpoliced. The alley twists slightly, revealing an old doorway where another cluster gathers around a flickering oil lamp. Cards are spread on a small wooden crate, and coins change hands with deliberate care. Observing them, you realize the stakes are as much about reputation as they are about money. Every glance, every gesture, every subtle nod carries weight. You catch a smile exchanged over the table, faint but meaningful, as though acknowledgement of loyalty is currency in itself. You continue along the lane, and notice a figure in the shadows crouched and alert. He carries a bundle wrapped tightly in cloth, the contents unclear. He steps with practiced caution, and you sense his experience in navigating the city's hidden currents. These streets reward those who move with care, those who understand both the physical and social terrain. Every action is a negotiation, every step a claim. An unusual custom reported at the time was that some young gang members marked doors or walls with discrete symbols to denote territory or alliances. These markings were subtle, understood only by those within the network. You strain your eyes in the low light, trying to spot such signs, imagining the invisible map etched onto the city by hands much smaller and quicker than your own. Further along, you hear laughter mingled with muted argument. A small scuffle breaks out, quickly resolved by a nod from an older member. The younger participants step back, acknowledging authority. Discipline here is subtle, reliant on respect rather than formal enforcement. The street becomes a classroom of survival, teaching lessons about loyalty, caution, and timing. You feel the rhythm of the place, the ebb and flow of control and freedom intertwined. Diaries and letters of the time describe that gang members often engaged in playful yet risky behaviours to maintain cohesion, from racing through alleys to performing small acts of daring. The thrill of mischief blends with the need for protection, creating an environment where every action carries double meaning. You imagine the adrenaline in each measured movement, the pride in each successful manoeuvre, the invisible threads connecting each participant. You pause near a corner where shadows deepen. A stray dog trots past, nose to the ground, tail wagging faintly. Even the animals navigate the city according to its invisible rules. The gang members do not react. They are accustomed to minor disturbances. Their attention is reserved for what truly matters: territory, safety, and subtle displays of dominance. You feel a quiet respect for the careful balance they maintain. You step away slowly, leaving the half-light behind, yet its rhythm stays with you. The laughter, the murmured commands, the subtle tension, the fleeting gestures all continue to echo in your mind. The city is alive in ways that often go unnoticed by those who only see broad streets and polite storefronts. Here you have witnessed the subtle interplay of power, protection, and survival in the corners few dare to enter. As you walk on, the street grows quieter. The half-light fades into the soft glow of distant lamps. The lessons of this alley linger. You feel them in the soles of your boots, in the quiet tightening of your shoulders, and in the awareness that even the smallest participants shape the rhythm of a city that never truly sleeps. You leave the half-light of the alleys behind and approach a massive, austere building whose walls rise like a fortress against the night. This is the workhouse, a place meant to provide shelter and sustenance, but remembered for strict rules and austere living. You step closer and feel the chill of stone pressing into the air around you. Windows glow faintly, but there is no warmth in that light. People inside move deliberately, their motions shaped by routine necessity and the strict expectations imposed upon them. Letters and diaries of the time describe that workhouses required residents to follow rigid schedules, waking before dawn to perform tasks that were often physically demanding. You imagine yourself among them, rising before sunrise, cleaning, cooking, or tending to the infirm, your every action measured and observed. The city depends on this labour, yet outside these walls, few recognise the human effort that sustains daily life within. A faint echo of neighbourhood gossip suggests that some children assigned to workhouses developed clever methods for hiding small scraps of food, using sleeves or pockets to preserve a piece of bread for later. You picture a child crouched beneath a narrow window ledge, eyes darting to ensure no one notices, lips pressed tightly around a stolen morsel. The small triumph of the survival takes on an almost secret significance in such a controlled environment. You step into the courtyard, noticing the crisp symmetry of paths and gates. Residents move in orderly lines, silent in their obedience. The head matron's sharp whistle cuts through the night, directing motions with authority that leaves no room for hesitation. Even in the dim light, the discipline is palpable. You feel it in your own chest, a slow tightening that mirrors the rules pressing in on all who live within these walls. Official documents from the city reveal that workhouses housed men, women and children, sometimes hundreds, in a single building, with limited privacy and minimal comfort. You glance at the small dormitory windows, dim rectangles behind iron bars. Within, people cluster together for warmth, for comfort, for whatever sense of community can survive under strict supervision. Even the mundane act of sleep becomes a structured event bound by time and order. You follow a narrow path to a kitchen where dim lamplight flickers across rows of metal pots. A handful of women stir porridge and broth over smoky flames. Every movement is methodical, taught to them on their first day, and honed over months or years. You notice the sounds of scraping spoons, the faint hiss of boiling liquid, the occasional soft murmur exchanged between workers. It is a symphony of duty, not leisure. Researchers remain unconvinced on whether workhouses truly alleviated poverty or simply perpetuated it. Some argue that the system provided necessary shelter for those with no other recourse. Others suggest that the strict discipline and harsh conditions discouraged independence, creating cycles of dependence that lasted generations. Standing here, observing both effort and compliance, you feel how both interpretations can hold truth. You turn your attention to the small yard where children sweep and scrub. Their broom bristles squeak against stone, echoing faintly across the courtyard. You notice how some pair up, working quietly in tandem. They move efficiently, their tiny frames navigating heavy burdens with surprising strength. Contemporary observers frequently remarked on the ingenuity these children developed under pressure, yet the accounts rarely include the exhaustion etched into their faces. A minor but memorable oddity of daily life claims that some workhouse residents secretly exchanged small handmade tokens or notes to maintain social bonds outside the rules. You imagine a folded slip of paper passed under a door or a small carved piece of wood tucked into a sleeve. These tiny acts of resistance remind you that even in controlled spaces, human creativity and connection find a way to persist. You continue walking along the edge of the courtyard, past a laundry area where wet garments hang in neat lines. The air smells faintly of soap and damp wool, yet under it lingers a heavier odour of mildew and smoke. You see a young man scrubbing the floor near a large trough of water, his sleeves rolled up arms, straining with effort. The work is repetitive, endless, yet necessary for survival. Every person here performs a role, however small, that keeps the machinery of the workhouse functioning. A hush falls briefly over the courtyard as the matron steps onto a small platform, surveying the residents. The whistle cuts once more, signalling an inspection. Everyone halts for a moment, faces straight, movements paused. Compliance is measured, obedience expected, and any lapse noted. You sense the quiet tension that underlies even the most routine moments. Analytical studies are not in consensus on whether workhouses improved overall public health or simply concentrated disease and malnutrition in one place. You imagine both possibilities as you watch residents carefully rinse and hang clothing, tending to chores that might otherwise be left incomplete. The structures exist to regulate life and provide order, yet that order comes at a cost. You leave the courtyard, moving toward the outer gate. The night air feels colder here, freer yet carries the weight of everything within the walls. You glance back once, noting the shadows shifting behind windows and doors, the faint movement of those who remain awake for duty or circumstance. The workhouse is alive, even in stillness, a reminder that survival is rarely easy, and that disciplined observation and resilience shape the lives of those who inhabit it. You continue onward, following the quiet rhythm of the city at night, carrying with you the sense of effort, endurance, and hidden labour that sustains an entire world behind walls. You step out of the workhouse courtyard and find yourself on a street lined with tall brick factories, their chimneys rising like sentinels into the dark sky. The night air carries the faint warmth of distant fires and the faint tang of smoke that lingers like a constant companion. Inside these buildings, life continues long after daylight fades, machines humming, and workers moving in steady patterns dictated by necessity and profit. You feel the energy before you see it, the faint vibration of industry travelling through the cobbles beneath your feet. A verifiable condition of life in the city was that factory labour often extended late into the evening, with shifts running 10 to 14 hours. You imagine the workers inside these walls, men and women bent over machines that clang, spin and hiss. Sparks flicker from the mechanisms lighting the interior in short, sudden flashes, revealing the determined faces of those who endure this world daily. Every motion is repetitive, precise and necessary. Each person contributes to the constant rhythm that sustains the city. You pause at a small opening where the factory's interior spills faint light onto the street. Through the shadows, you notice young apprentices moving with careful attention, feeding raw material into spinning machines. Their hands are skilled, yet you sense fatigue in the way their shoulders slump, the slow blink of tired eyes. Contemporary observers frequently remarked that child labour in factories was not only common, but essential to the operation of machinery, their small size and agility exploited to navigate narrow moving parts. A curious micro-custom mentioned in a reformer's diary recounts that some workers carried small tokens, charms, or even bits of thread to ensure good luck with machines that might otherwise catch or malfunction. You picture these talismans tucked into pockets or pinned inside aprons, a quiet human attempt to exert control over an unforgiving environment. You walk alongside the building, watching sparks flicker as the machines rotate inside. Steam hisses from pipes overhead, and the air smells faintly of hot metal and oil. A man wipes sweat from his forehead and adjusts the wheel of a spinning machine. Every turn is methodical, measured. You hear the rhythmic pounding of hammers on metal, the soft clatter of components falling into bins, the faint murmurs of conversation carried through the noise. Life here is relentless and precise, shaped entirely by the requirements of labour and production. Interpretations are varied among historians concerning whether factory conditions improved urban prosperity at the expense of individual health. Some argue that industrialization created wealth and employment for thousands, lifting families from absolute deprivation. Others suggest that the long hours exposure to dust, heat and machinery, and the lack of protective measures resulted in chronic illness, deformities, and premature death. Standing near the factory entrance, the clamour of industry, the heat of fires, and the fatigue etched into the faces you glimpse seem to reflect both perspectives simultaneously. Further along the street, a woman bends over a loom, her hands moving deftly and precisely. Each shuttle carries thread from one side to the other, producing fabric, row by row. She does not look up as you pass. The glow from the furnace behind her casts elongated shadows, giving the room a surreal quality, like a painting in motion. You notice a small jar of water by her side, tipped slightly to catch dripping condensation from overhead pipes. Even the smallest comforts are rare but valued here. A faint echo of neighbourhood gossip tells that some factory workers brought pets or small personal items to keep spirits alive during long, monotonous shifts. You imagine a mouse hidden in the corner of a loom room, or a small wooden toy on a windowsill, tokens of life beyond the machines. The thought is fleeting but humanizing, reminding you that even in regimented labour, people create space for small joys. You follow the street as it curves near another building, watching smoke curl upward from multiple chimneys. Each plume carries its own scent, some sweet from burning coal, others acrid from chemical processes. Workers pass in and out, some carrying bundles, others moving empty-handed. The patterns are predictable, yet each face tells its own story. You catch glimpses of concentration, fatigue, determination, and the quiet resilience that sustains the factory's heartbeat. One slightly eccentric practice recorded in a diary indicates that some workers timed their breaks with the factory whistle, not only to rest but to signal informal exchanges, brief gestures of camaraderie, or shared information about machine maintenance. You sense how these small unnoticed routines help people navigate a harsh environment, creating networks of survival amid strict schedules. You continue along the edge of the industrial district, noticing the heat radiating from kilns and furnaces, the shadows shifting with each pulse of light. The night is alive with motion sound, and the faint hum of metal meeting human skill. You feel the rhythm of the city here, the pulse of labour that drives every alley, every street, every neighbourhood. Factories do more than produce goods. They shape the lives of those who move within their walls and those who rely on them outside. The street narrows, and the hum of machinery fades slightly as you leave the factory area. Sparks and steam linger in your mind, a reminder of the tireless work that continues unseen, essential, and often unnoticed. The city has many faces at night, yet none is more immediate, more tangible than the relentless glow of firelight from within its industrial heart. You slip through a side street that leads into a row of grand townhouses, their facades gleaming faintly under the lamplight. Behind those polished doors, the city's secrets are maintained by people rarely acknowledged outside these walls. Servants move quietly, almost invisibly, performing labour that keeps households functioning smoothly. Each step they take is deliberate, a careful choreography learned through repetition and necessity. You notice the soft creak of floorboards and the faint whisper of voices as they pass from room to room, carrying trays, extinguishing candles, and preparing for the late hours. Eyewitness accounts describe clearly that servants in Victorian households often worked from before dawn until long after nightfall. Their tasks spanned cooking, cleaning, laundry, and tending to the needs of their employers, all while remaining almost unseen. You watch a young woman pause at a hearth to stir a pot, the faint orange glow illuminating her concentrated expression. Every movement is precise, efficient, and quietly essential. Their presence ensures the illusion of effortless comfort for those above stairs, yet the reality demands relentless attention. A whimsical note from street folklore recalls that some servants carried tiny mementos tucked into pockets or aprons, a lock of hair, a small carved trinket, or even a lucky coin, believing it would bring favour or ward off misfortune during long, exhausting shifts. You imagine these small objects resting against palms worn raw from scrubbing floors, a hidden world of personal rituals unfolding silently within the walls. You move deeper along the courtyard, observing a cluster of footmen arranging shoes and preparing uniforms for the morning. Their hands are steady, their heads tilted slightly downward in constant concentration. The quiet air is punctuated by the gentle clink of metal, the soft thump of leather, and the distant hum of conversation from above. You notice the subtle interplay between obedience and intuition, how every servant knows instinctively what must be done without explicit direction. Academic opinion remains unsettled on whether the long hours and rigid hierarchy of domestic service enhanced social cohesion or fostered resentment and psychological strain. You sense both possibilities as you watch a pair of maids exchange a whispered joke before returning to their tasks. Their laughter barely audible, yet revealing a shared humanity beneath the strict rules. A faintly humorous observation in contemporary writings remarks that some maids train themselves to move silently enough to avoid waking even the most light-sensitive household cats. You imagine a small feline leaping from chair to chair as its caretaker glides past, barely stirring the air around it, a testament to patience and skill developed over months of quiet labour. You continue along a narrow corridor lined with polished wood panels. A tray of silverware rests on a side table, waiting to be taken upstairs. A butler appears carrying a folded pile of linens and nods briefly at your presence before continuing. Their movement is so practiced that it almost seems choreographed, a silent ballet of service that requires both attention and endurance. Each gesture matters, from the careful placement of a spoon to the precise alignment of a chair. Researchers maintain differing views on whether the intense hierarchy of servant life limited personal autonomy or encouraged subtle forms of agency. You observe a young maid pausing behind a door frame, adjusting a candle for better light, then discreetly rearranging a small set of utensils to her satisfaction. It is a small assertion of order amid imposed rules, an invisible signature of individuality that might go unnoticed by the household's elite. The hallway grows colder as you move closer to the kitchens. Steam rises from boiling water, curling along walls and ceiling. The scent of cooked meat mingles with the faint aroma of vinegar and soap. A cook moves swiftly, chopping vegetables with precise, economical motions. Her hands are darkened slightly from repeated contact with food and heat. Even minor spills are corrected immediately, every gesture contributing to the silent machinery of domestic life. A curious domestic habit recorded at the time indicates that some servants would leave small notes or markings in obscure corners of the house, signalling a message to fellow workers or marking the completion of a task. You imagine a folded slip tucked behind a doorframe, a subtle code conveying information invisible to outsiders, but critical to the internal functioning of the household. As you continue, you hear the faint creak of stairs above, signaling the movement of a governess or a footman attending to late household needs. Even at night, duties continue. Tasks are interconnected. Every unnoticed action ensures the comfort, safety, and appearance of those residing upstairs. The invisible labour maintains an outward veneer that belies the effort beneath. You pause for a moment to observe a maid polishing a set of silver candlesticks. Her reflection flickers faintly in the polished surface, merging with the room's shadows. You realise that the life of a servant is measured in a minutiae in small adjustments, constant vigilance and the quiet endurance of tasks often unseen. Their work binds the household together, shaping both order and rhythm from the early hours to the late evening. As you leave the corridor and step back into the dim street outside, you feel the weight of everything contained within these walls. The servant's world is hidden yet essential, a reminder that the city thrives not only on the visible industries and public spaces, but on countless lives performing invisible, indispensable labour behind closed doors. You leave the polished streets behind and enter a dimly lit district where the faint glow of lamps struggles against fog. Ahead, a small narrow building houses a laboratory of its own kind, a place where curiosity, necessity, and uncertainty converge. Victorian medicine was in a state of flux. Treatments, techniques, and instruments were evolving, yet the margin for error remained enormous. You step closer and feel the weight of unseen hands at work, each one attempting to coax knowledge from a world that resists simple understanding. Diaries from the era recount that early medical practitioners often experimented with remedies, compounds, and surgical procedures that now seem crude or even dangerous. You observe a physician adjusting a small tray of instruments, his movements careful but tense. The room smells faintly of alcohol, herbs, and the metallic tang of tools. His eyes flicker over samples of substances whose purposes are partly known, partly conjectured. Each action carries stakes that are both immediate and profound. A minor oddity reported in household diaries states that some patients were offered concoctions flavoured with licorice or honey to make bitter medicine more palatable. You watch as a small spoon dips into a dark, viscous liquid, its aroma faintly sweet, a delicate effort to mask the underlying potency. Such measures were often intended to encourage compliance, blending practical care with human creativity in a time when even simple treatments carried risk. You step closer to a small table where another practitioner sorts vials of powder and liquid. Each label is handwritten, some in neat script, some barely legible. Instruments clink softly as he arranges them, preparing for an experiment that might provide insight or fail entirely. The faint flicker of candlelight casts long shadows across the room, illuminating faces lined with concentration. You notice the careful attention to detail, the subtle rhythm of repetition that guides each movement. Academic opinion remains unsettled on whether these experimental practices were beneficial overall or primarily served to advance personal knowledge at the expense of patient well-being. Some historians argue that early innovations laid the groundwork for later breakthroughs, while others suggest that many procedures caused unnecessary suffering. Observing the scene, you feel the tension between progress and risk, the delicate balance of discovery in a world that demanded results but lacked certainty. A fleeting anecdote in parish documents hints that some apprentices would accidentally mix harmless and noxious substances, prompting unexpected reactions. You imagine a small cloud of smoke rising, the startled gasp of a helper, and the quiet tension that follows such errors. Even in minor incidents, the stakes of experimentation were present, shaping the habits and vigilance of all involved. You move down a narrow corridor connecting several rooms. Behind one door, the faint murmur of conversation and the occasional cough suggest a patient awaiting assessment. The walls are lined with charts and sketches illustrating anatomy, growth, patterns and ailments. The air smells of damp stone and dried herbs, punctuated by sharper scents of chemicals. You notice how the room's layout prioritizes observation efficiency and sanitation as much as the knowledge being sought. Eyewitness accounts describe that medical apprentices often learned through trial and error, observing procedures before attempting them under supervision. You watch a young assistant carefully pour a small liquid into a dish, his hand steady yet alert. Every gesture carries meaning, each action, observed and repeated, forming a chain of learning that stretches from curiosity to practical application. A curious street custom preserved in memoirs mentions that people occasionally kept small charms or amulets with them when visiting doctors, hoping to guard against accidental misfortune during procedures. You imagine a patient clutching a tiny talisman in one hand while the physician works a silent plea for protection, mingled with science. You continue along the corridor, passing rooms with faint light spilling into the hallway. You hear the scratching of quills on parchment, the soft murmur of assistants recording observations, and the occasional cough or exclamation from those being treated. The building hums with quiet energy, a mixture of knowledge and uncertainty, skill and inexperience. Interpretive studies remain inconclusive on whether the emphasis on observation over patient comfort in early medical practice improved long-term outcomes. You sense both possibilities as you watch careful note-taking, the meticulous handling of instruments, and the faint tension in every movement. Knowledge progresses in fits and starts, often accompanied by discomfort and risk, yet it shapes the future nonetheless. You pause near a window to observe the street outside. The fog curls around lamplight, blurring the edges of the city. Inside, experiments continue quietly, hands and eyes guided by both hope and necessity. You step forward, leaving the dim laboratory behind. Yet the lessons of care, precision, and risk linger as you move deeper into Victorian London's nocturnal truths. You leave the flickering glow of laboratories behind and find yourself drawn toward a wider street where shadows stretch long and uneasy. The echo of distant activity carries a gravity that feels older than the city itself. Here the streets once bore witness to spectacles meant to instill both fear and compliance. Public hangings, though largely abolished now, were central to Victorian notions of justice and morality. You sense the weight of their absence, the echoes lingering in cobbled alleys and open squares where crowds once gathered to observe the final moments of condemned lives. Reports compiled by inspectors at the time illustrate that thousands would assemble in town squares, craning their necks to see gallows erected in advance of executions. You imagine standing among them, bodies pressed together, breaths visible in the cool air. The city held its collective gaze on those led to their fate, and the spectacle was both punishment and entertainment, teaching obedience and caution in ways more subtle than law books could convey. A small but fascinating observation in local records notes that some spectators brought binoculars, hand mirrors, or even small glass jars filled with water to better glimpse the proceedings from a distance. You picture children leaning over shoulders, vendors balancing precariously on crates, all attempting to witness events that were simultaneously horrifying and enthralling. The odd creativity displayed in observing the hangings offers a strange contrast to the gravity of the moment. You step along a familiar path, the night air carrying whispers of old stories. Lantern light spills unevenly across the stones, casting irregular shadows that seem almost alive. Even in the quiet, you can hear the faint rhythm of crowds past their murmurs, frozen in memory. Executioners, attendants, and citizens all played roles that shaped the emotional and social texture of the city. You feel the lingering pulse of collective fear mingled with curiosity, an intangible presence that haunts streets long after gallows are dismantled. A verifiable condition of life in the city was that public executions drew attention from far beyond the immediate neighbourhood, often requiring police and civic organisers to manage thousands of people in a single location. You see the implications in the present wide streets once designed for movement, now feel narrow, cramped, haunted by the memories of dense, expectant crowds. Researchers have yet to agree on whether public executions effectively reduced crime or simply reinforced sensationalism. Some argue that the deterrent effect was real, shaping behaviour in ways subtle and pervasive. Others suggest that the spectacle encouraged fascination, with violence feeding morbid curiosity rather than moral reflection. As you move through the quiet street, you feel the tension between these interpretations, the city itself acting as a witness to both outcomes. You notice a slight rise ahead where a former scaffold might have stood. Cobblestones are worn, polished faintly by centuries of traffic. You imagine the small tokens and scraps that spectators might have dropped, coins, trinkets, or scraps of clothing lost yet carrying symbolic meaning for those present. The street seems alive with whispers, even in its emptiness, as if the past continues to murmur to the attentive observer. A curious micro-custom preserved in memoirs indicates that some onlookers would bring small bells or noise-making devices to signal the approach of official figures, either to warn companions or to create dramatic effect. You imagine a faint chime carried across the square, blending with the murmur of the crowd, the shuffle of feet, and the occasional exclamation of surprise or fear. Even these minor interventions reflect the interplay of human agency and ritual in the midst of official proceedings. You continue walking, noting how buildings along the street bear faint scars of age, chipped corners, patched walls, and worn door frames. Each imperfection tells a story. The echoes of public punishment leave more than memories. They leave marks subtle and enduring that shape the perception of space and the rhythm of daily life. The air itself seems to vibrate faintly with residual tension, a reminder of communal participation in acts both solemn and spectacular. You pause near a doorway and listen. There is no sound beyond the occasional murmur of wind, yet the silence feels weighted. In your mind, you hear the distant footsteps, the rustle of clothing, the soft sighs of anticipation that once filled the square. The absence of bodies of the gallows of the crowd creates its own impression, a ghostly narrative of justice and social order. You move on, leaving the memory of public executions behind, yet the lessons linger. Fear, morality, and spectacle intersected in ways that shaped behaviour, conversation, and even architecture. The streets themselves hold the faint resonance of these moments, guiding your steps as you explore further into Victorian London's hidden truths. You move into a narrower street where the fog thickens, curling low over the cobblestones like a living thing. Shadows cling to corners and walls, and each step seems to announce your presence to unseen eyes. Here the city's subtle criminal networks come alive. Pickpockets and small-time thieves navigate these streets with practiced ease, invisible yet acutely aware of every passerby. You feel your senses heighten as you walk attuned to the faintest movement in the mist, the softest shuffle of feet or brush of clothing that might signify a hand reaching for your pocket. Historic records consistently show that thieves exploited poor visibility and crowded streets, operating in ways that minimized confrontation while maximizing profit. You notice a young man moving close to a group of shoppers near a lamppost, his gaze focused, his hands deft. You imagine how many times he has used the city's fog to mask his approach, blending into the blur of coats, skirts, and hats. The environment itself is his accomplice. A tiny entertaining observation from journals asserts that some pickpockets carried small magnets or tiny mirrors to help gauge metal objects or observe distracted passers-by without turning. You imagine him glancing at a reflection in a puddle or leaning slightly to catch a glint from a coin, his motions subtle and precise. The ingenuity is both alarming and fascinating, a reminder that survival in this city often depends on creativity. You continue along the street, careful to keep your distance from a man adjusting the strap of a bag over his shoulder. He pauses briefly to study a group of market-goers timing his steps with theirs. His body is relaxed but alert, a dancer navigating the rhythm of the street. The mist muffles sound, yet every shuffle, cough, and whisper carries meaning. In this environment, movement and silence are equally vital tools. Experts continue to debate whether the prevalence of pickpockets was driven more by poverty or by opportunistic tendencies among youth. Some contend that systemic deprivation created necessity and cunning, while others argue that criminal culture developed independent of financial need. Watching the careful maneuvers of the young thief, you sense that both factors intertwine inextricably, shaping actions and ethics in ways that cannot be untangled. A fleeting curious detail in neighborhood accounts mentions that some street thieves employed decoys, often children or animals, to distract victims, while others took the valuables. You picture a small dog trotting near a passerby's feet, or a child engaging in a minor commotion, drawing attention away from the primary target. The coordination required is remarkable, a silent choreography executed in the shadows. You step closer to a narrow alley, where a small group of men gather near a gate. Their voices are low, muffled by the thick fog, sharing information about which streets are safer, which homes carry the richest rewards, and which routes to avoid. The network seems invisible to outsiders, yet finely tuned, a social system operating beneath the surface of the city. You notice how each participant relies on experience, memory, and subtle cues from the environment to guide action. Analysis of historical accounts yields divergent interpretations on whether these networks were purely criminal enterprises or quasi-organized communities enforcing their own codes. You hear the soft echo of boots on stones, see the glint of coins tucked into a hand, and sense the intricate balance of trust, risk, and territory. The fog conceals much but reveals patterns to those patient enough to watch. Further down the alley, you see a young boy attempting to pick a pocket with exaggerated care. A street vendor stands nearby, his back to the child arranging goods. The boy freezes as a passerby approaches. He adjusts his timing steps lightly and resumes his task. The precision required is impressive, the awareness of rhythm, movement, and human attention heightened by necessity. The fog provides concealment but demands vigilance. A whimsical footnote from diaries notes that some thieves would carry coins made of lead or clay to practice sleight of hand without risking real money. You imagine a young hand moving rapidly, testing its dexterity in the chill night air. Each small exercise hones the skill required to survive in a city where the line between victim and perpetrator can be blurred. You continue along the fogged street, stepping lightly as though following an invisible path. The air smells faintly of smoke, wet stone, and coal carrying the residue of human activity over centuries. The thieves move alongside the rhythm of the city, unseen, yet profoundly present. Their shadowed work reminds you that every street has its secrets, and every passerby contributes to the unseen tapestry of the urban night. The alley opens into a small square, where mist settles into pockets, drifting around lamplights. You pause and breathe, absorbing the subtle tension and movement that continues even when you're alone. The city's fog is both cloak and companion, hiding and highlighting the ingenuity, risk, and daily struggle of those navigating its half-seen streets. You step forward, letting the shadows guide your path deeper into Victorian London's hidden layers. You follow a narrow path that slopes downward, the smell shifting as you approach the underbelly of the city. Here, Victorian London lives in a world hidden from most eyes. The sewers hum with quiet activity, carrying not just waste but the remnants of daily life from every street above. You can feel the damp chill creeping through your clothing, a tangible reminder that below the city exists a network, both vital and perilous. Official registries demonstrate that the city's sewer system expanded rapidly in the 19th century, designed to manage both human and industrial refuse. You imagine the labyrinthine tunnels twisting beneath your feet, water and debris flowing together in dark, sluggish currents. Every pipe arch and brick is part of a system meant to preserve sanitation in a city teeming with life and death in equal measure. The structure is vast, hidden, and essential. A minor but strange habit noted by contemporaries reports that some workers would carry small birds or mice with them into the tunnels to detect gas or hidden danger. You picture a tiny creature skittering along wet stones, a sentinel of the subterranean world, adding an odd sense of companionship and caution to otherwise grim tasks. The ingenuity in these small adaptations stands out against the damp, oppressive environments. You step carefully along the uneven ground, listening to the faint trickle of water and the distant echoes of dripping. Rats move through the tunnels with uncanny confidence, their tiny feet making no sound against the wet brick. You watch one pause and glance at your shadow, then continue along its route, as though the city itself belongs to it more than to anyone above. Eyewitness testimonies from the era indicate that the rats outnumbered humans in many sections of the network, thriving in conditions that would challenge nearly any other species. You continue down the main tunnel, noting the soft shimmer of water reflecting faint lamplight from above. Grates. Every footstep splashes slightly, sending droplets into the air. The temperature is steady damp, but not cold, and the smell of earth waste and faint chemicals fills your senses. You realize how the city's survival depends on this hidden ecosystem, an invisible circulation that sustains life above while hosting its own community below. Analytical studies continue to question whether these sewers primarily improved public health or merely concentrated filth and disease in controlled corridors. Some argue that the flow of waste prevented epidemics by diverting contamination, while others suggest that the tunnels themselves became breeding grounds for infection. As you step carefully, the truth seems layered, both functional and hazardous, a delicate balance of risk and necessity. A fleeting anecdote in parish documents hints that some children who explored abandoned tunnel branches carried small coins or trinkets, dropping them to mark paths or as talismans against danger. You imagine tiny, deliberate gestures left in hidden corners, a blend of play superstition and survival instinct shaping their secret world. You follow a narrower branch and hear the faint patter of tiny feet. Rats skitter along the edges, their movements precise and unhesitant. You catch the reflection of their eyes in the dim light, a reminder that this hidden city has its own rules, rhythms, and hierarchies. Every twist and junction is familiar to its inhabitants, yet mysterious to anyone above ground. Historic records consistently show that the sewer system also served as a refuge for marginalized humans, night workers, scavengers, and those seeking shelter from law or circumstance. You imagine someone crouched in a shadowed corner, using the damp tunnels to move unseen or hide until the city above returns to normal rhythms. Their presence adds layers to the meaning of the subterranean network, blending natural and human adaptation. A lightly humorous observation in contemporary writings remarks that some labourers believed the rats could predict flooding, hiding in corners ahead of rising water. You picture these creatures moving deliberately, their behaviour a subtle signal for those who know how to read it. Even superstition, when paired with observation, holds value here. You walk further along, feeling the echo of water and footsteps around you. Small currents twist past brick walls, carrying debris from the streets above. Every turn introduces new sounds, smells, and textures. The clink of a lost coin, the faint rustle of rat fur, the splash of water against stone. You sense the constant life, invisible yet active, shaping the city above and below in ways most citizens never consider. The tunnel opens slightly into a larger chamber, where light from a distant grate hints at the surface above. Water flows steadily toward unknown exits, and the air carries both chill and damp vitality. You feel the pulse of the hidden city around you, alive with small movements, secret life, and the faint hum of survival. The sewers are more than infrastructure. They are a living ecosystem, essential, dangerous, and remarkable in their quiet persistence. As you continue, you sense the hidden energy beneath the streets fading behind you, carrying with it lessons about resilience, adaptation, and the intertwined fates of humans and the creatures they share their city with. You step upwards toward the surface, leaving the underworld to continue its ceaseless, unseen labour. You ascend from the hidden tunnels and step back onto a dimly lit street where the faint glow of gas lamps flickers across damp cobblestones. The city feels quieter now, yet alive with its own subtle rhythms. Here street vendors ply their trades late into the night, their voices low but persistent. The smells of roasted chestnuts, hot pies, and pungent cheeses mingle with the city air, creating a sensory tapestry that is both inviting and strange. You sense the economy of survival, humming just beneath the calm surface. Letters and reports from authorities describe that street vendors often operated well past midnight, serving residents who worked long hours or travelled late. You watch a man arrange small bowls of broth on a wooden crate, his movements precise and careful. Steam rises gently from the containers, curling into the misty air. Each gesture is purposeful, designed to attract attention and maintain a customer base in a city that rarely sleeps. A whimsical footnote in memoirs records that some vendors carried tiny musical instruments or rattles to draw attention to their stalls, sometimes performing brief playful tunes to entertain passers-by. You imagine the gentle jingle of bells, the quiet rhythm of a drum, and the smiles of children drawn toward the small spectacle. Even in hardship, human creativity and commerce intertwine. You continue along the street, noticing how vendors balance their limited goods against the night's risks. Meat, vegetables, bread, and small trinkets are displayed in neat arrangements, each piece visible and tempting. Customers approach cautiously, selecting what they need, while avoiding congestion or unwelcome attention. You see the subtle skill in the vendor's eyes, the unspoken understanding of timing, positioning, and presentation that ensures a modest but steady livelihood. Professional commentary remains uncertain about whether these late-night markets primarily served as essential provision or functioned more as social hubs for nocturnal communities. Some historians assert that they provided vital sustenance and opportunity for survival, while others suggest the gatherings reinforced social hierarchies and street dynamics. Observing the careful interactions, you sense both purposes at work: nourishment and subtle social negotiation. A tiny, entertaining observation from journals notes that some vendors used small mirrors, angled on crates, to watch customers approaching from blind corners. You picture a careful glance, a flash of movement, a subtle nod of recognition. The practice is simple yet ingenious, a reminder that survival in the city relies as much on perception and strategy as on goods themselves. A young boy carries a basket of hot bread, weaving through the small crowd with quiet efficiency. He pauses briefly to offer a loaf to an elderly woman, then moves on, balancing speed with care. The street is a living web of interactions, each person participating in a rhythm that blends commerce, community, and caution. You notice the way hands reach for coins, how gestures are measured, how eye contact conveys unspoken agreements. Critical analyses remain inconclusive on whether the presence of street vendors effectively mitigated hunger in the poorest neighbourhoods, or merely provided a temporary patch in a larger system of scarcity. You feel both possibilities as you watch the careful preparation of food, the passing of coins, and the quiet satisfaction in small trades. The network sustains life, however imperfectly, while leaving traces of struggle and ingenuity. You pause near a lamp, watching steam rising from a pot of porridge. The faint heat carries a comforting aroma, blending with the dampness of the night. A man lifts a small tin to serve a portion to a customer who nods in gratitude. Each transaction, modest as it may seem, represents survival and connection, a fragile thread holding the community together in the dark hours. The sounds of the street are punctuated by the gentle shuffle of feet, the faint murmur of voices, and the soft clink of metal. You feel the rhythm of life here, slower than the factories and workhouses, yet no less vital. Each vendor, each passerby, each small act contributes to a larger narrative of endurance and ingenuity. You step forward, carrying the subtle lessons of commerce observation and adaptation into the deeper folds of the city's night. You step out of the shadowed side streets and find yourself drawn to the faint warmth spilling from a row of taverns. The smell of ale smoke and roasting meat mingles with the damp night air, creating a tapestry of scent that is both inviting and overpowering. Inside these pubs, the nightly crowd gathers to share stories, drown fatigue, and exchange news that rarely reaches official records. You feel the pull of human presence, the energy of bodies moving in rhythm with conversation, laughter, and the clatter of mugs on worn tables. Recorded observations from the period show that taverns were central to social life, particularly for working men and women who laboured long hours and sought communal space at night. You watch a barman lean over a polished counter serving pints while keeping a sharp eye on patrons. Each movement is precise, balancing efficiency and observation. The constant flow of customers demands attention, quick calculation, and a subtle management of energy in a room alive with human interaction. A curious anecdote preserved in town records indicates that some patrons would intentionally leave coins under tables or chairs as a sign of goodwill or to secure favour with the barman. You imagine the small secret gestures, hidden in the shadows, unnoticed by many yet significant within the microeconomy of nightly trade. These tiny rituals soften the edges of an otherwise rough space, blending practicality with human creativity. You move further into the street, noticing the ebb and flow of people. Groups pause at doorways, exchanging brief conversations, sharing news of employment shortages or rumoured disturbances elsewhere in the city. The fog settles around the lamplights, creating halos that illuminate clusters of faces in soft, surreal ways. You feel as though you're walking through a living painting, every figure contributing to a complex portrait of nighttime life. Analytical studies question whether the presence of taverns reduced crime or inadvertently encouraged disorder. Some suggest that offering spaces for socialization prevented more severe conflicts by providing monitored areas for interaction. Others argue that the concentration of alcohol fatigue in close quarters amplified tensions, creating frequent opportunities for minor skirmishes. Observing the interactions, you sense a mixture of both conviviality intertwined with caution, friendship shaded by risk. A whimsical note in contemporary diaries mentions that some regulars carried small personal charms, often tucked into coat pockets, as protection from rowdy patrons or the occasional misadventure. You picture a coin-sized token pressing against a hand, a silent reassurance amidst laughter arguments and the clinking of mugs. You pass a small group clustered near a hearth. Their faces are flushed from heat and conversation. They lean in, close, sharing stories that are loud enough to carry, but intimate enough to preserve secrecy. Each word is a thread connecting them to one another, and indirectly to the broader rhythm of the city. Even outside, you feel the pull of their proximity, the subtle gravitational effect of human warmth against the chill night air. Historic records consistently show that pubs served as informal centres of communication, conveying news, gossip, and social trends faster than official notices ever could. You note how a man gestures toward another, whispering information that spreads silently through the crowd. The movements and glances carry weight shaping perception and influencing decisions beyond the walls of the tavern. You continue along the street noticing a young apprentice delivering empty mugs back to the kitchen. Each step is measured, cautious. He navigates the uneven stones and lingering puddles, aware of the risk of tripping or colliding with patrons. His rhythm complements the steady hum of conversation, the background chatter of coins, and the occasional burst of laughter that punctuates the warm, smoky air. Debate continues in academic circles about whether these social hubs strengthened community bonds or merely reinforced class divisions. Some scholars argue that they provided essential interaction for those otherwise isolated by work schedules or economic hardship. Others contend that hierarchical dynamics within pubs mirrored wider societal inequalities, subtly enforcing social norms and expectations. As you move along the street, you feel both realities coexisting in the lively murmur of the night. You step past a narrow alley where music drifts out from an open window. The soft strumming of a fiddle accompanies laughter and song. The sound blends with the warmth of the taverns, carrying faintly into the fog. It reminds you that even amid labour, poverty, and vigilance, moments of culture, play, and delight persist. The city's nights is not merely survival. It is life expressed in music, storytelling, and the gentle pulse of human connection. You continue onward, leaving the row of taverns behind, carrying the faint murmur of conversation, clinking mugs, and quiet camaraderie with you into the streets beyond. The lessons of observation, community, and subtle negotiation linger as you step further into the layered life of Victorian London. You turn down a narrow lane that winds between cramped buildings, the walls pressing in as the fog thickens. Here the city reveals a quieter, yet equally urgent aspect of survival. Children roam these alleys not as wanderers without purpose, but as participants in a complex informal economy. Their laughter is soft-tempered by awareness, and their movements are swift, shaped by necessity and instinct. You notice the small deliberate gestures, handing a coin, lifting a bundle, ducking beneath a hanging sign that mark the rhythm of life for these young urban dwellers. Historic records consistently show that street children were responsible for carrying messages, selling small goods, or running errands, often starting their duties well before sunrise and continuing late into the night. You watch a group of boys distributing scraps of paper for a local tradesman, their hands moving quickly, eyes scanning for potential obstacles. The efficiency in their actions belies their youth, revealing skills learned in hard-won experience. A quirky footnote from parish records mentions that some children tied small bells to their shoes, believing that the sound would warn others of approaching authority figures or alert friends of danger. You imagine the soft jingling as they navigate puddles and uneven stones, each movement both playful and strategic. Even minor inventions like these mark the ingenuity required to survive. You walk carefully behind a girl, clutching a small bundle of bread, her pace measured. She pauses to adjust her scarf against the damp chill, then continues, aware of the subtle hierarchy among the children. Older ones guide younger companions, teaching them routes, warning them about certain corners, and instructing them on how to interact with adults. These lessons are informal, but vital, forming a code understood only by those who live within it. Scholars have long questioned whether these children's activities were primarily exploitative or represented early forms of agency and skill development. Some argue that necessity forced children into adult-like responsibilities prematurely, while others suggest that such experiences equipped them with adaptive skills and streetwise intelligence. Standing here, observing their precise coordination, you sense that both perspectives capture elements of reality. A small but amusing detail in diaries notes that some children used chalk to mark routes or hidden caches, leaving tiny symbols that others recognized but that remained invisible to passers-by. You imagine a faint line tracing the edge of a doorway, a small triangle etched near a lamppost, a silent language linking allies across the urban labyrinth. You move along the alley, noticing that the children work with remarkable cooperation. One child distracts a passerby, while another retrieves a bundle of cloth. Their timing is precise, their gestures subtle, a testament to experience and observation. The fog enhances the effect, softening edges and giving them a near invisible presence against the backdrop of the city. Eyewitness testimonies from the period indicate that some children also acted as informal messengers between families carrying news or parcels when adult hands were unavailable. You observe a boy hurrying past, package in hand, his eyes alert to shadows and movement. Each decision, each step demonstrates a careful balance of risk and purpose. You pause near a small courtyard where several children huddle to share warmth, whispering quietly about the day's events. Their breath rises in little clouds, illuminated briefly by lamplight from a nearby window. You notice the resourcefulness in their interactions, coins exchanged, food shared, and small tokens of trust distributed among them. This network sustains not only survival, but also social bonds, critical for life in these alleys. Debate persists among historians regarding the long-term impact of such nocturnal street activity on child development. Some argue that exposure to harsh conditions imposed lifelong trauma, while others suggest that the early responsibility fostered resilience and problem-solving abilities. Watching the children coordinate, adapt, and communicate, you understand the duality, hardship intertwined with learning, vulnerability, tempered by ingenuity. You continue down the alley, stepping lightly on wet stones. Each turn reveals another small tableau, a child pausing to adjust a bundle, a group exchanging whispered directions, another darting to avoid a stray cart. The rhythm is constant, a pulse that carries the combined weight of survival, alertness, and social strategy. You feel yourself becoming attuned to the subtle patterns, the unspoken rules, and the quiet determination embedded in every gesture. As you leave the alley behind, you carry with you the impression of life. At the margins, inventive, resourceful, and fully present within the city's intricate nocturnal ecosystem. The children's small steps echo long after you move, on a reminder that even in the shadows, the pulse of human agency persists. You walk into a stretch of street where the fog hangs thick, curling around lampposts and creeping along building edges. It muffles the sounds of footsteps and conversation, making familiar streets feel both mysterious and disorienting. The dense mist carries with it both the scent of coal smoke and the subtle decay of damp brick and refuse. As you move, you become aware that the city takes on an almost living quality, a presence that conceals as much as it reveals. Diaries and eyewitness accounts confirm that fog was a persistent feature in London, especially during winter months, often reducing visibility to mere yards. You notice how streetlights cast hazy halos, blurring the edges of familiar structures. Figures appear and disappear from view, their movements ghost-like. The fog transforms even ordinary streets into a labyrinth, creating opportunities for both mischief and protection. A minor eccentricity from contemporary accounts indicates that some residents carried small bottles of aromatic herbs or vinegar to mask the thick, acrid smell of the fog. You picture hands raising a tiny vial to the nose, inhaling sharply and, briefly, finding relief as the scent of smoke and soot recedes. These small adaptations highlight the human capacity to navigate environments that are simultaneously hazardous and enchanting. You continue along the street, aware that the fog reshapes perception. Shadows stretch and merge, alleys seem to elongate, and every doorway could hide a story or a danger. You notice the subtle way passers-by adjust their pace, glance around, or clutch coats more tightly against the damp chill. The fog imposes both caution and curiosity, blending awareness with instinctive navigation. Scholars remain divided regarding whether London's fog primarily worsened public health or simply altered urban behaviour. Some argue that persistent smog contributed directly to respiratory disease and the spread of illness. Others suggest that while health risks were real, The fog also encouraged careful movement, heightened vigilance, and informal networks of observation that mitigated certain dangers. You feel the tension of these perspectives as you move through the blurred streets. A whimsical observation recorded in town journals notes that some children would play games in the fog, pretending it was a vast enchanted forest, hiding and running, as their imaginations turned damp alleys into secret realms. You watch a small figure dart between shadows, a glimpse of playful ingenuity amidst an otherwise oppressive atmosphere. Even the dense mist offers opportunity if one knows how to read its rhythms. You step carefully over a puddle, its surface reflecting the faint orange glow of a street lamp. You sense how the fog transforms ordinary surfaces into traps hiding irregular stones, shallow holes, and scattered debris. Pedestrians adjust instinctively, shifting weight-lifting skirts or balancing small baskets to avoid accidents. The interplay of fog and human movement creates a subtle choreography, each step dictated by both caution and familiarity. Reports by contemporary inspectors indicate that businesses, especially pubs and small shops, adjusted their routines in foggy conditions, lighting extra lanterns or posting attendants to guide customers safely. You notice a shopkeeper leaning from a doorway, gesturing with a hand to guide someone past a puddle or low step. These small acts reflect the interplay of environment and social adaptation, shaping both commerce and community interaction. You continue past a narrow arch where the fog thickens further. You hear the faint drip of water and the echo of footsteps ahead. Shapes loom and vanish in the mist. You imagine stories whispered among residents about unseen figures, mysterious noises, and secret activities that seem to appear only when the fog enveloped the streets. The interplay of perception, fear, and imagination adds another layer to the city's nocturnal life. Interpretive studies remain inconclusive on whether the fog primarily exacerbated crime or encouraged cooperation. Some historians argue that criminals used the low visibility to conceal movement, while others suggest that neighbours, shopkeepers, and even children developed intricate strategies to navigate safely and alert one another. Standing amidst the swirling mist, you sense the truth in both the fog conceals it, challenges, yet it also teaches vigilance and adaptability. You move on feeling the fog pressing gently against your skin, curling through your hair, softening the hard outlines of the city. Every street, every alley, every faint silhouette is altered, transformed into a subtle interplay of light, shadow, and potential story. You follow the rhythms of movement, listening to the faint echoes, and letting the city's mysterious pulse guide your path through the secrets hidden in the night. You turn down a narrow lane that slopes toward the denser parts of the city, where the faint glow of distant fires flickers against brick walls. The air is thick with smoke soot and the lingering warmth from countless hearths. Chimney sweeps move quietly through the streets, carrying brushes, ladders, and small bundles of tools. You notice the rhythm of their work, careful, precise, and relentless. Each sweep ensures that the hearths above burn efficiently and safely, yet the labour is dangerous and often overlooked by those who benefit from the warmth. Archival records of the time assert that chimney sweeps were essential in preventing house fires, especially during winter months, when coal was burned constantly. You watch a small boy emerge from a narrow passage, carrying a long, flexible brush. His face is smudged with soot, his hands blackened by labour, yet his movements are practiced and controlled. Every stroke, every adjustment demonstrates skill honed through repetition and necessity. The city relies on their work in ways invisible to most. A whimsical note in period accounts recalls that some sweeps would carry small whistles to warn others of falling soot or debris while climbing tight flues. You imagine a sharp, faint sound echoing inside a darkened chimney, alerting householders or fellow apprentices to danger. The blend of caution and playfulness provides a small comfort against a job that is otherwise treacherous. You continue along the street, feeling the heat radiate from open doors and windows. You notice the faint glimmer of sparks rising from chimneys, tiny embers that could easily ignite nearby thatch or wood. The sweeps navigate this environment with a combination of agility, intuition, and careful planning. Their presence maintains a delicate balance between warmth and hazard for entire neighbourhoods. Debate persists among investigators as to whether child labour in chimney sweeping was primarily exploitative or offered apprentices opportunities to develop skills and independence. Some argue that the dangers and harsh conditions made it a form of abuse, while others contend that it provided practical knowledge, employment, and a measure of autonomy unavailable elsewhere. Observing the sweeps move along the roof lines and down narrow flues, you sense both realities coexisting in the night air. You pause at the corner of a building where two sweeps adjust a ladder against a brick wall. Their movements are synchronized, a silent cooperation born of necessity. One climbs carefully, while the other steadies the base, watching for loose bricks or shifting footing. The skill required is evident, and the stakes are high. A misstep could mean injury, or worse yet, they proceed with calm determination. An unexpected custom recorded in diaries notes that some sweeps would rub a small piece of coal on their hands or faces to make their soot less visible to patrons or supervisors. You imagine fingers coated lightly in black blending into shadows, a subtle disguise for those moving unseen through rooftops and chimneys. Even minor tricks like these hint at the creativity required to navigate their hazardous work. You follow a narrow alley to a small courtyard where several sweeps gather briefly to exchange information about households' flues and hazards. Their conversation is low, almost secretive, carried on whispers. Each person shares experiences, warns of dangerous structures, and recalls methods for climbing safely. These interactions form a network of knowledge that ensures survival in a demanding, invisible profession. Historic records consistently illustrate that chimney sweeps face long hours, dangerous work, and frequent injury. Children were often employed due to their small size, able to fit into tight spaces adults could not. You watch a young apprentice bend to reach a narrow opening, then twist carefully, sliding the brush inside with precision. The blend of courage, endurance, and skill is striking a testament to the resilience demanded by the city's infrastructure. You move onward, leaving the courtyard and following the faint trail of smoke rising into the night sky. Sparks float gently upward, caught in the lamplight, while the faint scent of burning coal mixes with the mist. You sense how the sweep's work touches countless lives, maintaining warmth and safety in a city otherwise at the mercy of fire and fog. A minor eccentricity from contemporary journals mentions that some sweeps carried small tokens, charms or trinkets believed to protect them from accidents while working in confined chimneys. You imagine these charms pressed against palms or tucked into sleeves, a quiet superstition that blends practical caution with human hope. As you step further along the street, the rhythm of movement, conversation, and distant fires accompanies you. The sweeps continue their work unseen above, below, and within walls, sustaining the city in ways largely invisible but profoundly essential. The night carries their quiet presence forward, and you sense the hidden pulse of labour, courage, and resilience that keeps Victorian London alive. You follow a narrow, dimly lit passage where shadows lean close to the walls, stretching and twisting with the occasional flicker of a lamplight. The streets are quieter here, yet movement persists, subtle and rhythmic. Labour continues unseen by most of the city. Nighttime porters, dock workers and delivery boys traverse alleys carrying goods to market shops, and households their tasks largely invisible but essential. You notice the careful pacing, the deliberate pauses, and the way their eyes scan for obstacles and other pedestrians. Accounts preserved in diaries demonstrate that many labourers worked during nocturnal hours to meet the demands of commerce, particularly in areas near markets, docks and factories. You observe a young man carrying a large bundle of textiles down a narrow street, his shoulders hunched, movements precise. The work requires endurance, focus, and a keen awareness of surroundings. The rhythm of the city continues even when most dwellers sleep, and these labourers form its quiet heartbeat. A minor humorous observation, recorded in municipal archives, mentions that some night porters would whistle softly to alert colleagues of approaching hazards or hidden obstacles. You imagine the subtle tune travelling down the alley, both a signal and a playful way to mark their territory. Even in labour, small moments of levity or ingenuity appear, giving life to the monotony of physical effort. You move closer to a cluster of workers sorting crates near a warehouse. They lift, stack, and organise with practised efficiency, speaking in low tones. Each motion is deliberate, conserving energy while maintaining precision. The faint sounds of wood scraping against wood ropes, taut and released, and muffled conversation blend into a quiet symphony. You feel the intensity and skill required, the delicate balance between speed and care that defines night labour. Interpretation among historians remains varied concerning whether night labour primarily enhanced efficiency or merely exploited the physical endurance of young and impoverished workers. Some scholars suggest that these hours allowed trade and supply chains to function more smoothly, while others argue that workers faced unnecessary risks and fatigue, often with minimal compensation. Observing the care and skill of each movement, you sense the interplay of necessity, exploitation, and ingenuity. You continue along a canal-side lane where men and boys carry goods from barges to nearby shops. Water laps quietly against hulls and lantern light reflects in the ripples. Each step is measured, every glance cautious. The work is invisible to those who pass above street level, yet essential for the flow of goods that sustain the city. You notice the cooperative signals exchanged between workers, a subtle choreography that ensures efficiency and safety. A whimsical detail in period letters notes that some night labourers carried small trinkets, coins or talismans, in their pockets to bring luck while handling heavy or awkward cargo. You imagine the jingling of coins, the faint weight of a charm against the hand, a subtle personal ritual that provides comfort amid the demanding work. You pass a small alley where a young delivery boy balances crates of bread on his shoulder. He pauses briefly to steady his load, glancing up at the dim lamps above. The streets around him are quiet, yet movement is constant. You see his fingers gripping tightly, his steps cautious. Each action is an exercise in rhythm and patience, a blend of careful calculation and muscular endurance that defines nocturnal labour. Scholarly inquiry questions whether the invisible labour of night workers fostered social mobility or reinforced socio-economic stratification. Some argue that the skills, knowledge, and endurance gained in these hours provided valuable experience, while others contend that the physical strain and exposure to danger perpetuated vulnerability. As you observe, you understand that both realities coexisted, skill and resilience intertwined with exploitation and risk. The alley opens into a larger street where porters deposit goods near warehouses. The air smells faintly of damp wood oil and coal dust. Workers communicate with low signals, gestures and murmurs, coordinating movement without disrupting the quiet of the city. Each action has purpose, every motion rehearsed, yet adapted to the fluidity of circumstance. You feel the invisible rhythm of night labour, the pulse of a city sustained by bodies and minds operating unseen. You step forward carrying with you the sense of hidden effort, endurance and skill. The streets, dark and quiet, are alive with human industry that most will never witness. You sense the energy of this hidden world, the persistence of those who navigate shadows, to keep the city moving, unnoticed yet indispensable. You walk into a quieter part of the city, where the lamplight struggles to penetrate thick fog. The streets are lined with empty doorways and narrow alleys, yet movement persists. Night policemen patrol these routes with deliberate steps, their presence subtle but crucial. You notice the careful balance between vigilance and invisibility, each officer attuned to the city's rhythms and hazards. Their eyes scan doorways, windows and shadows, measuring both threat and opportunity for intervention. Diaries and eyewitness accounts confirm that Victorian night policemen covered extensive beats, often walking miles in a single shift, while relying on their wits and observation rather than modern technology. You observe one man adjusting his lantern, casting a circle of light over wet cobblestones. His posture is alert, his movements calculated each step, a careful negotiation with both terrain and circumstance. The city's safety rests in part on these quiet guardians. A lightly humorous observation preserved in municipal archives mentions that some night officers carried small whistles or bells, not only to summon help, but also to ward off stray animals, birds, or even mischievous children. You imagine a faint intermittent sound bouncing off buildings, announcing presence while blending necessity with a touch of improvisation. You move along a narrow lane where the policeman pauses near a shuttered shop, his hand resting lightly on the butt of his staff. Even in stillness, his gaze sweeps over the street, noting every subtle movement, every glimmer of shadow. People moving in the distance adjust their pace, some noticing him, others passing by as if he were part of the architecture. His role is largely preventive, a silent watch shaping behaviour without the need for dramatic action. Academic discussion continues regarding whether the presence of night policemen genuinely deterred crime or primarily reassured citizens while leaving underlying issues largely unaddressed. Some argue that their patrols prevented minor offences and established a sense of order, while others suggest that more serious crimes remained unaffected. Observing the officer, you sense both perspectives, coexisting the subtle assertion of authority and the limitations imposed by environment and numbers. You continue walking, noting how the fog softens sound and blurs vision. The policeman pauses at a corner, listening to distant noises, a cat scuttling a cart rolling over uneven stones, faint voices. His ears and eyes are trained, yet even he cannot perceive everything. You realize that vigilance is not about omniscience, but the capacity to interpret patterns, detect anomalies, and respond appropriately when necessary. A minor eccentricity recorded in contemporary letters indicates that some officers carried small charms, talismans, or lucky coins tucked into coats to ward off danger or ensure a safe patrol. You imagine fingers brushing against a coin as he pauses, a tiny ritual providing psychological comfort amid the uncertainties of night work. Further along, you see a small grouping of pedestrians moving cautiously through the mist. Their awareness is heightened, glances, quick steps measured. The presence of the night policeman affects their behaviour subtly. They walk straighter, pause briefly at corners, avoid loitering. The city itself bends to the rhythm of vigilance, adjusting behaviour to the invisible boundaries established by watchful eyes. Interpretation among historians remains varied concerning whether the watchmen primarily enforced law or served more as symbols of authority. Some suggest their presence instilled discipline and respect for societal norms, while others argue their impact was limited to minor infractions and public perception. As you observe, both truths seem woven into the city's nocturnal fabric, creating a rhythm that sustains order without overt action. You step forward, following the officer as he rounds another corner. The fog wraps the streets in a grey shroud, muffling footsteps and conversation. The city breathes quietly, around you alive, yet restrained, shaped in part by the silent vigilance of those charged with its protection. You feel the careful interplay of observation, restraint, and subtle influence that defines the night watch, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful forces operate quietly, unseen, but profoundly felt. You move down a narrow lane where the faint glow of lamplight illuminates workers bent over uneven cobbles. The night air is cold and damp, carrying the smell of wet stone coal dust and faint traces of oil from machinery. Midnight labourers repair roads, mend sewers, and maintain city infrastructure tasks largely invisible to residents, yet crucial for the smooth functioning of urban life. You notice the careful coordination among workers, each step calculated to avoid missteps, each motion deliberate and rhythmic. Surveys conducted by civic authorities affirm that city streets required constant maintenance, especially in densely populated areas where wear and tear accumulated rapidly. You watch a worker carefully lift a worn cobblestone, checking its alignment before replacing it. The motion is precise, almost ceremonial, reflecting both the skill required and the importance of the task. The streets above rely on these unseen efforts to remain passable, safe and orderly. A curious anecdote in town hints that some repair crews kept small bottles of aromatic oils or vinegar to mask the stronger odours of fresh asphalt or damp earth while working at night. You imagine a few drops rubbed on hands, a subtle comfort against the sharp smells of labour. It is a tiny innovation blending practical necessity with human creativity. You continue along the street, observing the interplay of labour machinery and environment. A young apprentice sweeps debris from a partially repaired patch, his movements careful and efficient. Each worker is alert, scanning for hazards like loose stones, passing carts, or the occasional stray animal. The rhythm of effort is steady, punctuated by quiet directions exchanged in low voices. You sense a tacit understanding among the crew, an unspoken coordination learned through experience. Debate persists among researchers over whether night repairs primarily improved public safety or simply shifted the burden of labour to those least able to rest during these hours. Some argue that these operations prevented accidents and kept the city running efficiently, while others contend that the workers endured unnecessary fatigue and risk. Observing the careful, methodical motions of the team, both perspectives feel relevant, balanced by the necessity of their task. You notice the flicker of a lantern on a distant corner, guiding a cart filled with replacement stones. Its operator adjusts speed to accommodate the uneven road, ensuring that the cargo arrives intact. The coordination of light movement and timing reflects a network of effort that most citizens never witness. You feel the subtle hum of this invisible system, the quiet pulse of order, in a city that thrives even while most residents sleep. A small amusing habit recorded at the time notes that some labourers would whistle quietly to maintain a rhythm or to signal to colleagues when visibility was poor. You imagine a faint tune rising above the clatter of tools and falling stones, both functional and comforting in the dark night. It adds a human layer to what otherwise seems mechanical, a thread of creativity interwoven with necessity. You pass a section of newly replaced cobblestones and see the reflection of lamplight on slightly damp surfaces. The subtle gleam highlights the precision of the work, each stone fitted carefully against its neighbour. You recognise that the city's structure depends on these silent, meticulous acts of labour. The streets themselves are alive with human intervention, guiding the flow of movement, commerce and life. Interpretation among historians is contested regarding whether these late-night labour efforts primarily benefited the wider public or served to exploit workers who faced dangerous and exhausting conditions. Some scholars emphasise the social utility and preventive value, while others highlight the inequities and physical strain endured by those who laboured while most slept. Standing in the quiet street, you sense both realities coexisting, intertwined in the rhythm of midnight work. You continue forward, the night cool against your skin, footsteps echoing softly. The lamplights illuminate patches of road shadows dancing between them. Each movement, each carefully replaced stone, each subtle signal carries a weight you can almost feel. The city thrives in part because of these unseen hands, shaping and sustaining life through labour that is rarely noticed yet profoundly essential. You follow a twisting alley toward the hum of activity hidden from most eyes. Crates and baskets pass from one figure to another, loaded and unloaded with careful precision. Nighttime deliveries thread through narrow streets and shadowed lanes, transporting everything from fresh produce to raw materials for factories. You notice the muted rhythm of movement, footsteps echoing softly on cobblestone's wheels, of small carts turning with measured force hands, exchanging goods in the faint glow of lanterns. Each motion is purposeful, vital, yet largely invisible to the broader city. Public notices and municipal logs confirm that many trades relied on nocturnal transport to keep markets and factories supplied. Merchants depended on these deliveries to maintain continuity in commerce while avoiding the congestion and hazards of daytime streets. You watch a man carefully place a crate on a cart, adjusting its weight to prevent tipping. The work requires attention balance and a quiet understanding of the narrow urban environment. A whimsical note in period accounts recalls that some couriers carried tiny charms or small coins in their pockets, believing they would bring good fortune or protection during the night. You imagine the faint clinking of metal against wood as each worker pauses briefly to touch the token, a subtle ritual that blends superstition with human ingenuity in the midst of demanding labour. You continue along the alley, noting how the deliveries proceed in near silence, a choreography of careful timing. Men and women navigate tight corners, avoiding obstacles and keeping pace with their companions. Crates of vegetables, sacks of grain, and bundles of cloth pass smoothly, each item accounted for, each step deliberate. The rhythm is almost musical, an unseen symphony of commerce in motion. Academic commentary is divided on whether nighttime trade primarily enhanced efficiency or merely shifted risk onto workers already subject to exhaustion. Some historians argue that the practice was crucial for the city's economy and public convenience, while others suggest that the strain and hazards disproportionately affected labourers with limited power or protection. Observing the steady flow of activity, you feel the truth of both arguments, efficiency intertwined with vulnerability. You step near a dimly lit courtyard where a small delivery team unloads crates into a warehouse. The lantern light glints off wood and metal, illuminating the careful placement of each bundle. Conversations are muted gestures, precise movements rehearsed. The process is seamless to an observer unaware of the physical and mental coordination required. You sense the quiet expertise that ensures goods reach their destination intact and on schedule. A minor eccentric observation from contemporary diaries notes that some delivery workers marked crates with subtle symbols to indicate priority or fragility, readable only to those in the know. You imagine a faint chalk mark on a corner of a box, the invisible communication threading through the network of couriers, a small layer of organisation hidden in plain sight. Further along, a young apprentice guides a small cart filled with dairy past a narrow doorway. He adjusts the weight with careful hands, glancing down at uneven cobblestones and puddles. Each step is measured, every turn deliberate. The apprentice is learning the nuances of timing, weight distribution, and spatial awareness, essential skills in a city whose streets can turn treacherous in fog or darkness. Investigators have not reached consensus concerning whether the reliance on nighttime deliveries fostered economic growth or primarily served to exploit labourers' endurance. Some suggest the practice created opportunities for skilled and alert workers, while others emphasize the risks of fatigue injury and minimal oversight. You feel both realities at once, the subtle interplay of necessity, skill, and danger, shaping every movement you observe. You follow the trail of carts as they pass under an archway into a broader street. The fog curls softly around lanterns, muffling sound and emphasizing the subtle clatter of wood on cobbles. The deliveries continue seamlessly, flowing into warehouses, shops, and markets. You sense the hidden pulse of commerce, the quiet choreography of a nocturnal city sustained by hands and minds that remain largely unseen. As you move on the rhythm of footsteps, the soft scrape of carts and the faint whisper of conversation linger in your awareness. Nighttime deliveries are a lifeline for the city, a network of diligent skill and subtle coordination that supports the urban environment while operating in quiet obscurity. You feel the hidden energy beneath your feet and around you, a city alive with movement, purpose, and invisible labour. You step onto a wider street where the first pale hints of dawn begin to press through the mist. The night's activity has slowed, yet the city is far from silent. Labourers carry the last of their loads. The hum of carts' footsteps and muted conversation blending into a low rhythm that anticipates the day. You notice the delicate transition, the dark streets gradually brightening, the lamplight fading, and the movement shifting from nocturnal coordination to the bustle of morning. Each motion is purposeful, yet carries the residue of the hidden hours just past. Contemporary observer notes reveal that the city experienced a slow, uneven awakening. Markets prepared for daytime trade factories began their shifts, and households stirred in anticipation of the hours to come. You watch a baker lifting loaves into the morning air, the heat and smell of fresh bread spilling into the street. The subtle interplay of light, sound and scent marks the passage of time, layering the city's sensory experience with the memory of the night. A minor strange practice recorded in municipal diaries notes that some early risers would leave small tokens of work or tools neatly arranged on doorsteps to indicate completion of tasks or readiness for the next shift. You imagine a tiny bundle of rope, a small brush or a folded note, all signalling silent communication between those who laboured while others slept. It is a quiet testament to human organisation and ingenuity hidden in plain sight. You continue along the street, feeling the soft dampness underfoot, the faint chill in the air. Figures move deliberately, children heading to schools, porters returning carts to storage vendors, arranging their goods for the day. Even as the city brightens, the rhythm of night labour echoes through the streets, shaping behaviours, patterns and expectations. The cumulative energy of hidden hours lingers, blending into the new day. Interpretation among historians is contested regarding whether the transition from night to day primarily reinforced efficiency or perpetuated inequality. Some argue that early morning labour provided critical preparation for commerce and industry, enhancing productivity. Others suggest that the burden fell disproportionately on those with limited choice, reinforcing the social hierarchies inherent in urban life. As you observe the streets filling with movement, both interpretations feel visible, layered upon one another in complex interplay. You pause near a canal where the reflection of early sunlight shimmers faintly across the water. Boats are being loaded, nets adjusted, and supplies moved carefully. Labourers communicate in soft tones, gestures and glances, maintaining efficiency while adapting to the growing light. The river itself seems alive with the echo of nocturnal activity, carrying both goods and stories into the unfolding day. A whimsical footnote in letters from the period mentions that some night labourers would leave small signs on doors or posts to mark safe passages or useful shortcuts for the next shift. You imagine faint chalk marks or subtle scratches, a secret map visible only to those who know the code. These small interventions, invisible to most, facilitated continuity and order, connecting night to day seamlessly. You move further along, noticing that the streets themselves carry memories of labour-worn, cobbles, polished steps, faint traces of soot and water. Each surface, each corner, and each doorway tells a story of human endurance, ingenuity, and persistence. The night's efforts, though largely hidden, remain etched into the very infrastructure of the city. Scholars remain uncertain about whether the cumulative effect of nocturnal work contributed more to public benefit or to the exploitation of labour. Some suggest that cities functioned more efficiently because of these hidden hours, while others emphasize the physical and psychological toll on those involved. Observing the blend of quiet streets and the stirrings of early morning life, you sense both dimensions unfolding simultaneously. You step onto a slightly busier avenue where morning light penetrates the mist and illuminates the city's facade. Smoke rises faintly from chimneys, carts roll steadily, and people begin their routines. The city has awakened, yet the traces of the night remain, subtle rhythms, shadows, and the soft pulse of countless unseen hands that maintained it. You feel the continuity of life, the hidden labour giving way seamlessly to the visible, and the quiet persistence of those who kept the city alive while most slept. The city seems to stretch, yawn, and prepare itself for the day ahead, yet the memory of midnight labour and hidden activity lingers in your awareness. Every footstep, every sound, every flicker of light is coloured by the work that preceded it, reminding you that life continues above ground, while history and human effort remain quietly interwoven beneath the surface.